You ever notice how the most persuasive people rarely sound persuasive? They never push, never demand, never argue. Somehow they make you agree, even when you swore you wouldn't. And the wild part is, you walk away thinking it was your idea all along. That's not luck. That's covert compliance. The art of guiding decisions without ever seeming like you did. It's one of those invisible skills that runs the world. You see it in negotiations, relationships, marketing, even friendships. But most people have no clue it's happening to them. The truth is, humans resist being told what to do. The second someone senses control, their mind activates what psychologists call reactance. It's that inner pushback that whispers, "No one tells me what to do." So the real masters of influence bypass it completely. They don't tell you. They let you tell yourself. Before we continue, a quick note. Many of you watch our videos, but haven't subscribed yet. So please subscribe to our channel Restwise and join our growing community. We'd also love to know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's amazing to see how connected we all are. If you enjoy relaxing with philosophy, psychology, and science while drifting into sleep, give this video a like and stay with us on the journey. Now, let's get back to the video. Here's the secret. People trust their own conclusions more than your arguments. So the trick is not to convince them directly. It's to create the path where their only natural conclusion benefits you. Imagine you're leading someone down a hallway. You don't shove them through the door. You just make every other option look a little less inviting until the door you wanted them to pick feels like the obvious choice. And when they walk through it, they feel powerful, autonomous, smart. That's covert compliance. Think about this. A boss says, "I need this report by tomorrow." Immediately, the employee feels pressure, obligation, maybe even annoyance. But if the boss says, "How soon do you think we can finish this so the team doesn't fall behind?" The dynamic flips. The employee is now solving a problem, not obeying a command. If they answer, "Probably by tomorrow," guess what? They've set the deadline themselves. The boss didn't force compliance. The employee volunteered it. That's how powerful framing is. The same request, but one triggers resistance and the other triggers ownership. Because people want to protect their freedom, but they also want to be consistent with their own choices. When you make someone feel like it's their decision, they'll defend it, justify it, and commit harder than if you demanded it. There's this old psychological experiment that perfectly proves it. A group of researchers asked homeowners to put a giant ugly sign in their front yard that said "Drive carefully." Almost everyone said no. Then they tried something different. They asked a similar group to first put a small, barely noticeable sticker in their window that said "Support safe driving." A week later, they came back and asked about the sign again. This time, over 70% agreed. Why? Because they saw themselves as supporters of the cause. They weren't being told what to do anymore. They were just being consistent with the image they'd already built of themselves. That's the hidden doorway into someone's decision making. You don't force behavior. You align with identity. People crave internal harmony. If you can get them to say yes to a small idea first, or to emotionally invest in a narrative, they'll naturally follow through with bigger actions that match that identity. It's not manipulation, it's momentum. But let's make it real. Say you're trying to convince your friend to start working out with you. If you say, "You should really hit the gym," it sounds like pressure. But if you casually mention, how good you've been feeling since you started, and then ask, what do you usually do to unwind after work? You shift the focus. When they say something like, I usually just scroll my phone, you can gently add, I used to do that too, until I realized lifting for 30 minutes actually made me feel more relaxed. It's not a pitch. It's a seed. They start thinking, maybe I should try that. And when they decide to go, they'll think it was their idea. That's the art of subtle prompting. You never steal their agency, you guide it. Now here's something few people realize. The mind doesn't like mental tension. It craves closure. When you pose an open-ended question, the brain rushes to fill the gap. So instead of saying, you need to do this, you ask, what would happen if we tried this? It shifts them into exploration mode. And once they start reasoning toward your outcome, it feels self-generated. Advertisers have been doing this for decades. Ever notice how the best commercials don't tell you to buy something? They show you a story where someone like you already enjoys it. They never say, you should drink this coffee. They show someone savoring a quiet morning, warm light spilling through the window, soft music playing, and your mind fills in the rest. You think, I want that feeling. And when you grab the product, you think it was your own choice. The underlying principle is simple. Never battle for control. The moment people feel like they're choosing freely, they become receptive. The moment they feel cornered, they shut down. Even in arguments, this works. If someone's resisting your point, instead of saying you're wrong, ask, what makes you see it that way? That question disarms them. It forces them to articulate their reasoning, which often makes them aware of its weak points. You didn't attack them. You invited them to explore, and if your logic is sound, they'll drift toward it without even realizing. There's another layer here that goes deeper. Social mirroring. People subconsciously align with those who reflect their values and emotions. So when you subtly mirror someone's tone, pace, or outlook, you lower their guard. You become familiar, relatable. Once they feel that alignment, small suggestions slip through like trusted advice. They're not agreeing with you. They're agreeing with themselves, through you. And that's the beauty of covert compliance. It's not about domination or deceit. It's about understanding the psychology of freedom. Influence doesn't always come from force. It comes from flow, from guiding attention, planting subtle cues, and letting people walk into decisions they believe they built. The most influential people in the world aren't the loudest ones in the room. They're the ones who make everyone else feel smart, respected, and autonomous. Because when people feel in control, they'll follow you anywhere. And thank you for letting them lead. The influence triangle: confidence, certainty, control. You can feel it before you even realize it. When someone walks into a room and they radiate that quiet, unshakable energy, everyone notices. It's not loud, not aggressive, but there's something about the way they move, the way they speak, that makes people lean in. That's not charisma. That's structure. It's what I call the influence triangle: confidence, certainty, and control. Three forces that work together like gears. When one turns, the others move with it. Most people chase confidence like it's some magical personality trait. They think it's about talking louder, standing taller, or pretending they have everything figured out. But confidence on its own is fragile. Real influence doesn't come from pretending. It comes from stability, from a foundation built on certainty and control. Let's start with confidence, because it's the surface people see first. Confidence isn't about saying you're right. It's about acting like the outcome is already decided. It's not arrogance, it's conviction in motion. When you speak with quiet certainty, people unconsciously assume you know something they don't. There's a psychological reason for that. Humans are wired for social referencing. When we're uncertain, we look to others for cues on how to feel or what to believe. So if you project steadiness, even in chaos, people align with that signal. That's why confidence spreads faster than logic. When your energy says everything's fine, other people's nervous systems relax around you. You become a stabilizing force, and humans are drawn to stability. But here's the twist: confidence without certainty is hollow. It feels performative. It's like a balloon with no air inside. The second someone challenges it, it collapses. Certainty is deeper. It's not a mood. It's a mental anchor. It comes from believing in something so solid that doubt can't shake it. You don't have to know everything. You just have to be sure of what you do know. When you speak from certainty, your language changes. You stop using filler words like maybe, probably, or I think. You start saying, here's what happens, or this is how it works. That shift in language tells the brain, this person has clarity. And people don't follow the smartest person in the room. They follow the clearest. There's a fascinating neurological reason for this. The human brain constantly looks for predictability. When someone communicates with certainty, it gives the listener's brain a sense of safety. It feels like order in the middle of noise, so the brain tags that person as a reliable source. Over time, this builds authority, not through dominance, but through emotional security. Now, the third corner of the triangle: control. This is where real influence becomes powerful. Control doesn't mean manipulating people. It means controlling the energy in the interaction. The tone, the pace, the emotional direction. Most people give this away without realizing it. Someone challenges them, and they react. Someone raises their voice, and they match it. The moment you react, you've lost control. The conversation is now running you. But when you stay composed, when your tone stays calm while others get loud, it sends a message. It says, I'm not playing on your emotional field. You're playing on mine. That's psychological dominance without aggression. It's subtle, but it changes everything. Because whoever controls the emotional tempo controls the outcome. Think about it like this. Confidence attracts attention. Certainty builds trust. Control secures compliance. It's a chain reaction. You can't sustain one without the others. If you have confidence but no control, you come off impulsive. If you have certainty but no confidence, you sound robotic. If you have control but lack certainty, people sense calculation. But when all three align, it creates something magnetic: calm authority. You can see this in great leaders. They don't rush their words. They pause deliberately. They move with purpose, and their presence carries weight. That's because they're not chasing validation. They're grounded in internal certainty. And that certainty gives them control over their delivery. The confidence you see is just the visible tip of that iceberg. Here's a practical way to feel it in your own life. Before a conversation that matters, take 10 seconds to slow your breathing. Drop your shoulders. Center your thoughts on what you actually believe to be true, not what you want to prove, what you know with clarity. That's certainty. Then decide the emotional pace you want to set. Calm, grounded, steady. That's control. Finally, when you speak, don't rush to fill silence. Silence is confidence. Let people absorb your words. When you speak less but mean more, they lean in. That's the triangle in motion. Now here's the shock most people never realize. Confidence is contagious, but so is doubt. If you walk into a negotiation with even a hint of uncertainty, it spreads like smoke. People feel it instantly, even if you never say a word. But if you hold your frame, even when questioned, your energy stays clean, and clean energy creates influence without effort. There's a famous study in behavioral psychology that explains this perfectly. In high-stress group situations, like emergency evacuations or military drills, the crowd naturally follows the person who displays the most composure, not the one who yells the loudest. Calmness reads as competence. That's the influence triangle at work under pressure. Confidence attracts, certainty stabilizes, control directs. And here's the real kicker. People rarely remember what you said, but they always remember how they felt around you. If your presence made them feel secure, certain, and guided, they'll follow you without needing persuasion. That's influence without force. So the next time you want to lead, negotiate, or persuade, stop focusing on tactics and start focusing on your triangle. Anchor your certainty, project calm control, and let confidence be the natural side effect. Because when those three connect, your words carry weight even in silence. People stop resisting. They start aligning. Not because you overpowered them, but because your presence made them feel safe in your direction. That's the quiet power of the influence triangle, the invisible structure that turns presence into persuasion. Framing power. Have you ever noticed how two people can say the exact same thing, but one of them sounds powerful while the other sounds desperate? Same words, same message, completely different impact. That's not about what was said. That's about framing. Framing is the invisible language that shapes how people interpret reality, and the wild part is, most of it happens before a single word leaves your mouth. Every interaction you have exists inside a frame, a mental boundary that defines who holds the power, what the situation means, and which rules everyone unconsciously agrees to play by. The person who controls that frame doesn't have to dominate the conversation. They just set the stage so that everything that happens inside it bends in their direction. That's framing power. Think of it like a camera lens. The lens doesn't change the scene itself. It changes what you focus on. In influence, the same thing happens. You're not always changing the facts. You're changing how those facts are perceived. Whoever controls perception controls meaning. And whoever controls meaning controls the outcome. Here's the shocking part. Most people give away their frame instantly. The moment they seek approval, explain too much, or justify themselves, they step into someone else's world. They play by the other person's emotional rules. That's why the first few seconds of an interaction matter so much. The first tone you set tells the other person whose frame they're entering. Imagine this. You walk into a meeting late, and instead of apologizing and scrambling to catch up, you calmly take your seat, make eye contact, and say, "Glad we're all here." That small shift flips the energy. You just reframed from being the one who's late to being the one who sets the tone. You didn't say a single defensive word. You just acted as if your presence rebalanced the room. That's control without force. Framing works through emotional gravity. The stronger your internal belief in your own frame, the more others feel it. Humans are social creatures, and our nervous systems are constantly scanning for emotional authority. When you're calm, Grounded and certain, people unconsciously sink to you. It's like emotional gravity. They orbit your frame. You can see this dynamic play out everywhere. Watch two people argue. The one who stays emotionally still while the other gets louder usually wins. Not because their argument is better, but because their frame holds stronger. The frantic one accepts the calm person's emotional reality without realizing it. Energy moves toward stability. That's why silence, when grounded in certainty, is louder than any argument. But framing isn't just about dominance. It's about meaning. If someone says, "This is a problem," you can reframe it instantly by saying, "No, it's a challenge." See what happens. You didn't disagree with the facts. You redefined them. The emotional weight changes. A problem feels heavy and hopeless. A challenge feels active and solvable. The person's state shifts just from the context you created. That's the magic of subtle reframing. Psychologists call this the meaning effect. The human brain doesn't respond to reality directly. It responds to the story it tells about that reality. You can use that to shift how others feel about any situation. You're not lying or manipulating. You're guiding perception to unlock action instead of resistance. Here's something most people never realize. Framing begins before the conversation even starts. Your posture, your timing, your tone, even your level of comfort, all communicate the story of who's leading the interaction. If you rush to respond, you step into their frame. If you pause, breathe, and speak on your rhythm, they step into yours. It's like setting emotional boundaries in real time. Let's make it real. Imagine you're talking to someone who's upset. If you rush to calm them, you've already accepted their emotional frame. That something is wrong and you need to fix it. But if you listen, stay grounded, and say, "I get it. Let's look at this clearly," you create a new frame. Suddenly, you're not reacting to their storm. You're inviting them into your calm. That's what it means to lead without words. Here's a trick that works in almost every social situation. Slow your movements. People who feel low status move quickly, fill silence, and over-explain. People who hold the frame move slow and deliberate. They give others time to adjust to their rhythm. It signals subconscious authority. And when your energy slows, the entire room sinks to your pace. You've shifted the frame without saying a thing. Framing also defines how people remember you. If your energy communicates, "I'm the one who defines the tone," they start associating you with clarity, confidence, and direction. But if you let them pull you into their chaos, they see you as reactive. Every leader, negotiator, and communicator who understands this becomes almost untouchable because their calm sets the rules for every interaction. Here's something that will change how you see influence forever. People don't respond to what you say. They respond to what your presence tells them is true. If your presence says, "I'm in control, I'm grounded, and I know where we're going," they follow. If your presence says, "I'm uncertain and trying to prove myself," they lead you. Words only decorate the frame. Presence defines it. So the next time you enter a situation, ask yourself, what's the frame here? Who's defining the emotional tone? Then, before you speak, decide what reality you want to project. Calm confidence, curiosity, authority. Whatever it is, embody it first. When your body and energy align, your words become optional. That's what it means to control context without words. Framing power is silent influence. It's how the most persuasive people guide every situation without ever appearing to try. They don't push. They pull reality around them. And once you learn to do that, You stop chasing influence, because influence starts chasing you. Emotional triggers that bypass logic. You ever wonder why people make decisions that make absolutely no sense? Why they buy things they don't need, chase people who hurt them, or defend opinions that crumble under the slightest bit of reason? It's not stupidity, it's wiring. The truth is, human beings are not logical creatures. We're emotional ones who use logic to justify what our emotions already decided. That's why emotional triggers are the real levers of influence. They slip past reason and speak straight to the survival systems in the brain. The ones that don't think, they just react. And when you understand what those triggers are, you can guide decisions, change perceptions, even shift behaviors without force, because logic argues, emotion decides. The first trigger is belonging. Humans crave acceptance more than almost anything. Deep down, the mind is terrified of social rejection, because for most of human history, isolation meant death. That fear still runs underneath everything we do. So when you frame something as what people like us do, it creates instant alignment. It's the unspoken rule of group identity. You're not convincing someone with facts. You're inviting them into belonging. That's why slogans like "Join the movement" or "Everyone switching to this" hit so hard. They bypass logic and go straight to the need for inclusion. The person doesn't stop to ask if it's really better. They just don't want to be left out. The desire to belong overrides analysis every single time. The second trigger is status. Status isn't about ego, it's about survival hierarchy. The brain is wired to track position. Higher status equals more access to safety, resources, and attention. So when someone feels like an action elevates their status, they move toward it. When it threatens their status, they resist. That's why shaming rarely works. The moment someone feels their status dropping, they cling even harder to the behavior you're trying to change. But if you make the change feel like an upgrade, like it enhances their image or identity, they'll sprint toward it without realizing why. Here's a quick example. If you tell someone you need to be more disciplined, it feels like criticism. But if you say, "You strike me as someone who values control. That's why I think you'd crush this routine," it triggers the need to maintain status. They move toward the compliment. You're not manipulating. You're aligning with their internal need to stay elevated. The third trigger is certainty. The brain hates uncertainty more than pain. That's why people stay in bad relationships or miserable jobs. The predictability feels safer than the unknown. Certainty gives the illusion of control, and the mind clings to it like oxygen. So when you communicate with calm, grounded certainty, people instinctively trust you. You become a safe emotional anchor. In Persuasion, certainty doesn't come from saying more. It comes from saying less with confidence. If you sound like you've already decided, people borrow your conviction to settle their own uncertainty. That's how emotional contagion works. Your nervous system becomes their evidence. Another powerful trigger is novelty. The human brain is addicted to what's new, but only when it feels safe. Novelty lights up the reward system, releasing dopamine, the same chemical that drives desire and curiosity. That's why headlines that say things like "the secret no one told you" or "what they never want you to know" work so well. They promise both mystery and discovery. The brain leans in because it feels like gaining knowledge equals gaining advantage. Here's where it gets interesting. Logic looks for reasons. Emotion looks for relief. Every emotional trigger is tied to reducing discomfort. Belonging reduces loneliness. Status reduces insecurity. Certainty reduces fear. Novelty reduces boredom. So when you want to influence, you don't fight emotion. You find the emotional tension someone's trying to resolve, and you offer the path that releases it. There's another subtle but incredibly strong trigger: urgency. The human brain equates scarcity with importance. When something feels limited, we automatically assign it more value. That's why people buy things during flash sales they don't even want. Their logical brain knows it's unnecessary, but the emotional brain says, "I can't miss out." Scarcity hijacks patience. It bypasses reasoning because the primal brain only understands now or never. But here's the hidden layer few people talk about. Emotion is contagious, but congruence determines credibility. If you try to trigger emotion in others, but your own energy doesn't match, the mind detects the mismatch. Influence collapses. The power comes from resonance, not performance. You have to feel the emotion you want others to feel. If you want them calm, you must embody calm. If you want excitement, your energy has to pulse with it naturally. That's how the subconscious syncs. Mirror neurons in the brain literally copy the state they perceive. That's why people don't believe what you say. They believe what they feel from you. One of the most fascinating studies in behavioral psychology found that emotional responses occur almost 5 times faster than rational analysis. By the time your conscious mind tries to make sense of something, your emotional system has already decided how to feel. That's how emotional triggers bypass logic. They hit the nervous system first, and logic comes in later to justify the feeling. You can use this ethically to inspire instead of manipulate. Frame your ideas around emotional truths. Don't tell people what to think. Show them how it feels to believe it. Paint emotional contrast. Show the pain of staying stuck and the relief of progress. The brain learns through contrast, not instruction. So the next time you need to influence, stop stacking facts and start tuning into feeling. Ask yourself, what emotional need is active here? Is it belonging, status, certainty, novelty, or urgency? Once you identify that, shape your message to give emotional relief first. The logic will catch up later. Because at the end of the day, people don't follow what makes sense. They follow what feels right. And when you can touch the emotion behind the decision, logic doesn't just step aside. It starts working for you. That's the hidden layer of influence. Emotional triggers that slip under the guard of logic and pull decisions straight from the core of human instinct. Psychological anchoring. There's something powerful about people who make you feel a certain way just by being around them. You can't explain it, but the moment they enter the room, the energy shifts. You feel more alert, more drawn in, maybe even a little smaller. That reaction isn't magic. It's psychology. It's what happens when someone has anchored themselves in your mind. When your brain links their presence to authority, confidence, or power. That's psychological anchoring. Most people think influence is about what you say. It's not. It's about what people feel when they see you. The human brain constantly builds associations, linking feelings to faces, tones, places, and gestures. Once those links form, they become shortcuts. You no longer think about the person logically. You feel them automatically. And if you understand how those emotional shortcuts work, you can intentionally anchor yourself to power in other people's minds without ever asking for it. Here's the wild part. Anchoring happens whether you plan it or not. Every time someone interacts with you, their nervous system takes a snapshot: your tone, your pace, your posture, your presence. If you're calm under stress, that becomes your anchor. If you're reactive or anxious, that becomes your anchor too. Over time, the brain stops separating the person from the feeling. You become the emotion you consistently trigger. Think about someone you trust deeply. Just hearing their voice probably makes you feel grounded. That's an anchor built through repetition. Now think about someone who always drains you. The second their name pops up on your phone, your stomach tightens. That's an anchor too. The emotional reaction is automatic. You didn't choose it. Your brain learned it. Anchoring comes from a concept in behavioral conditioning. Every time two experiences happen together, the mind fuses them. If a specific tone of voice always comes with confidence, the tone itself starts feeling confident. If your presence consistently brings calm or clarity, people start associating you with safety and control. Eventually, you don't need to prove power. It's already linked to you. Here's how powerful that is. In one famous experiment, researchers paired a simple sound with a mild shock to a group of subjects. Later, when they played the sound without the shock, the subjects' bodies still reacted with stress. Their nervous systems couldn't tell the difference. That's how anchoring works. Emotion fuses with trigger, and logic never gets a vote. Now here's the part most people miss. Anchoring isn't just about emotion. It's about timing. The moment an emotion peaks, the brain records the source. So if you consistently appear at the height of positive emotion, during breakthroughs, relief, or moments of clarity, your presence becomes tied to that feeling. When you enter the room later, people subconsciously relive that emotion. It's like emotional branding. Think about the way powerful mentors or leaders behave. They rarely rush in during chaos. They arrive when people need direction most. Their timing makes them the emotional reset point. After a while, their presence alone triggers certainty. They've anchored themselves to resolution. You can use this same principle in everyday life. Let's say you're on a team that often panics under pressure. Instead of matching the chaos, slow down your tone, breathe deeper, and speak fewer words with more weight. The calm you project becomes a contrast anchor. Over time, the group's nervous system links your presence to stability. And here's the beautiful part. Even when you're not around, your influence lingers. The moment someone says your name, that sense of calm resurfaces. There's a hidden rule here: people don't remember what you did for them. They remember how they felt in your presence. That's the emotional residue you leave behind. When that residue is power, composure, and clarity, people start seeking your input not because they have to, but because their brain associates you with certainty. That's how invisible authority is built. But anchoring can work against you too. If you show up tense, defensive, or inconsistent, that energy becomes your brand. You'll walk into rooms and people won't know why, but they'll feel uneasy. That's why the key to positive anchoring is emotional consistency. Your energy has to broadcast the same message over and over until it becomes effortless. Anchoring also works through repetition of subtle cues. Your tone, your language, your gestures. If every time you deliver insight you use the same calm posture, the same pace, the same micro smile, the brain starts linking that entire state to credibility. Eventually, you could say almost anything in that state, and people would trust it. Not because of content, because of conditioning. Here's something fascinating. High-status people often use anchoring through environment. Their spaces, their lighting, their pace all reinforce the same emotional message. When someone steps into their office or onto their turf, the frame shifts automatically. The environment itself becomes an extension of the anchor, a sensory reminder of who holds control. So how do you make people link you to power ethically? Start by choosing the emotion you want to embody. Calm authority, quiet confidence, grounded certainty. Then, practice consistency. Show up with that same tone every time, especially in moments of tension. Speak less, move slower, and let silence become part of your presence. Silence, when anchored to confidence, becomes power. People fill the space with their respect. Next, control timing. Step in when emotion is high and stability is needed. If you enter too early, you blend in. Enter at the peak of chaos, and you become the relief. That contrast cements the emotional anchor. Finally, protect your presence. Don't overexpose it. The more selective you are with your availability, the stronger the anchor becomes. Power diluted is power forgotten, because at the end of the day, anchoring isn't about forcing people to see you as powerful. It's about teaching their nervous systems that your presence equals stability, confidence, and control. Once that link forms, logic doesn't matter. Their body already believes you, and that's when you stop needing to project power, because power projects you. Storytelling as a weapon. You can control facts all day and still lose control of people, because humans don't live by facts. We live by stories. Every belief you hold, every choice you make, every judgment you pass is built on a narrative running quietly underneath your awareness. That's why storytelling isn't just communication. It's weaponized influence. When you can control the story, you can control what people believe, what they defend, even what they're willing to fight for. But here's the shocking part. Most people don't realize the stories that shape them weren't written by them. They were absorbed. Parents, culture, media, peers, all planting tiny storylines that tell you what's right, what's wrong, what's possible, and what's not. Once those narratives take root, the brain stops questioning them. It filters reality through them instead. That's the real power of narrative. It's not that stories inform belief. Stories become belief. They give emotion a structure, a sense of meaning. The brain craves that meaning more than accuracy. You can present 100 logical points, and someone will still cling to the story that makes them feel safe, because emotion decides what logic gets to touch. When you understand that, storytelling stops being decoration and starts being control. The storyteller defines the world. The listener simply lives inside it. Think about every powerful movement in history. It didn't start with data. It started with a story. A story about freedom, about destiny, about good versus evil. Those stories rewired entire societies. They gave people an identity. Once identity fuses with narrative, reason becomes irrelevant. People will die for a story they believe defines them. Here's why this works so deeply. The brain processes stories as experiences, not information. When someone hears a story, their mind doesn't just listen. It simulates. The same neural circuits that activate during real experiences light up during imagined ones. That's why a story can make your heart race, your eyes water, your skin tense. The body can't tell the difference between memory and imagination. That emotional realism is what makes stories bypass logic completely. Advertisers, politicians, and spiritual leaders all use this, consciously or not. They don't just tell stories. They embed direction into them. They make you feel the conclusion instead of explaining it. Once you've felt the story, Logic becomes decoration. Here's a simple example. Say you tell someone that failure builds strength. That's advice. They nod, maybe agree, then forget. But if you tell them a story about a boxer who got knocked down 30 times and still came back to win, suddenly they feel the truth. They visualize it. They live it. And from that moment on, they don't just know the idea, they believe it. The story planted the belief deeper than logic ever could. But storytelling as a weapon goes even further. It can control the frame of reality itself. If you want to influence how people interpret events, you don't argue facts. You reshape the storyline. You set the beginning, define the villain, control the emotional tone. Humans remember meaning, not detail. If you define the meaning, you define the memory. Think about how easily a narrative can flip perception. The same person can be called a hero or a monster depending on which story you tell about them. The same event can look tragic or triumphant depending on the emotional context. Once someone accepts your version of the story, their mind defends it automatically. To attack the story feels like attacking their identity. That's how narrative becomes armor. Here's what most people miss. The most persuasive stories are not told at people. They're told through them. You make the listener the main character. You position them inside the journey. The moment they emotionally step into that role, they stop analyzing and start participating. And once they're participating, their subconscious starts rewriting itself to match the arc you created. There's a reason every myth, movie, and religion uses the same structure: struggle, revelation, transformation. That sequence mirrors the emotional pattern of real human change. Our brains are wired to see meaning through struggle. When you tell a story that follows that rhythm, the mind surrenders to it because it feels familiar. It feels like truth. But here's the dark edge. If you can tell a story that defines the hero, you can also define the villain. You can aim emotional energy at any target by positioning it as the obstacle in your story. People rarely question whether that target deserves it. They're too busy defending the story's emotional integrity. That's how mass manipulation works. Not through facts, but through emotional direction hidden in narrative form. Yet storytelling doesn't have to corrupt. It can heal just as easily. The same mechanism that binds people to fear can free them with meaning. If you tell a story that makes someone see possibility where they once saw limitation, you reprogram their future. Their brain begins expecting that new outcome, and behavior follows. You've changed their life not by convincing them, but by giving them a new lens to live through. The key to using storytelling ethically is simple. Never remove choice. A good story expands perception. A manipulative one traps it. The difference is whether your narrative invites people to see more or demands that they see only what you allow. That's the line between influence and control. So if you want to master storytelling as a weapon, start by mastering emotional architecture. Every story has 3 pillars: desire, conflict, and transformation. Desire pulls attention. Conflict holds it. Transformation delivers belief. When those 3 connect, the story becomes real inside the mind, and belief follows naturally. The ultimate truth is this: people don't believe what's true, they believe what feels true. And what feels true is always delivered through story. If you can shape that story, you shape the emotional gravity that reality orbits around. That's how storytellers quietly rule the world, not with data, not with arguments, but with invisible strings woven through narrative. Because in the end, facts inform. Stories command. The art of subtle suggestion. There's a strange kind of power in people who can make you agree without ever asking for agreement. They don't push, they don't argue, they just speak in a way that slides under your guard and rearranges how you think. You walk away believing it was your idea the whole time. That's not magic. That's subtle suggestion, the psychological core of conversational hypnosis. Now, when people hear the word hypnosis, they imagine someone waving a pocket watch, putting people to sleep, or taking control of their minds. But real conversational hypnosis doesn't look like that. It's not about taking control. It's about guiding attention. You're not forcing someone to do anything. You're gently leading their focus until their subconscious begins to fill in the blanks exactly the way you want it to. Here's the part that shocks people. Hypnosis isn't sleep. It's heightened focus. It's when the conscious mind quiets just enough for the subconscious to listen. And that happens every day without anyone noticing. You drift into it while watching a movie, scrolling endlessly on your phone, or staring at the road while driving. In those moments, you're suggestible, not because you're weak, but because your attention is absorbed. Conversational hypnosis works by creating that same state intentionally through language. The first step is pacing. You start by matching the person's current reality. You describe what's true in their immediate experience. That builds subconscious agreement. For example, you might say something like, "You're sitting here listening, trying to understand how this works." Their brain checks it and says, "Yes, that's true." With every small agreement, their resistance lowers. The conscious mind loves being right, and when it keeps hearing accurate statements, it stops defending. Then comes leading. Once their mind is following your rhythm, you subtly shift from describing reality to shaping it. You link what's already true to what you want them to feel or believe. It's like emotional hand, holding, guiding them from known ground into your direction. That's the heartbeat of subtle suggestion. Another layer is embedded command. These are small phrases woven into sentences that the subconscious mind hears as instruction. For instance, when you say something like, "As you begin to realize how calm this feels," the phrase "begin to realize" activates automatically. The listener doesn't process it logically. They feel it. The command hides inside the flow of conversation, so it bypasses resistance. Here's something most people overlook. Suggestion only works when it feels natural. The moment someone senses manipulation, the door slams shut. That's why tonality, pacing, and timing matter more than words. You have to sound congruent, relaxed, confident, certain. Your tone tells the subconscious it's safe to follow. If your tone feels off, the words lose power instantly. Now, the real secret of conversational hypnosis is that you're not hypnotizing anyone. You're helping them hypnotize themselves. You're guiding their imagination in a direction that makes your idea feel self-generated. Because the human mind trusts what it creates far more than what it's told. That's why subtle suggestion feels invisible. It's not an external push. It's an internal realization you designed for them. Let's break this down through something simple. Imagine you're trying to calm someone who's anxious. If you say "relax," they resist. It feels like a command. But if you say, "It's interesting how even just noticing your breathing starts to feel a little easier," you're guiding their focus instead of pushing it. Their subconscious obeys without argument because it doesn't feel controlled, it feels aware. That's what subtle suggestion really is. redirecting awareness until the desired state happens naturally. Psychologists have studied this for decades. They found that when people imagine an experience vividly, the brain and body respond as if it's real. That's why guided imagery and language patterns that spark sensory imagination are so powerful. You're not telling the person what to do. You're letting their imagination do the heavy lifting. Another cornerstone of conversational hypnosis is open loops. These are incomplete ideas that keep the subconscious engaged. For example, if you say, "There's something fascinating about how the mind can shift," without even realizing exactly when it happens, you've created an open loop. The sentence never fully closes. The brain keeps processing it, searching for resolution. That's how you keep someone mentally tethered to your frame, even in silence. Here's something you can test instantly. In your next conversation, slow down your speech. Match the other person's tone for a few sentences, then lower your volume slightly and speak slower. Their body will start mirroring yours. When that happens, you've entered pacing and leading territory. Once their rhythm syncs to yours, every suggestion lands deeper. You've moved from conscious exchange to subconscious alignment. But the real mastery of subtle suggestion isn't about technique, it's about intention. If you use it to manipulate, it backfires. The subconscious picks up on energy faster than words. Authentic calm, genuine certainty, and grounded focus are what make your words magnetic. People don't follow language. They follow emotional state. So when you speak, imagine planting thoughts like seeds. You don't force them to grow. You create the environment where growth feels natural. You use language that feels open instead of closed. Instead of saying, "you should," you say, "you might start to notice." Instead of saying, "do this," you say, "imagine what happens when." These gentle frames turn resistance into curiosity and curiosity into compliance. Subtle suggestion works because it rides on the brain's default desire for coherence. The mind wants stories to make sense, patterns to complete, emotions to resolve. When your language creates that sense of flow, people lean into it unconsciously. At its highest level, conversational hypnosis isn't about control. It's about connection. It's the art of speaking directly to the subconscious. Respectfully, smoothly, and invisibly. You stop trying to convince, and you start guiding. You stop pushing logic, and you start shaping emotion. Because the real hypnotist isn't the one holding control. It's the one who knows how to let go just enough for the other person to feel like they're leading themselves. And when you can master that balance, influence becomes effortless. Authority and obedience. You ever notice how some people can walk into a room and everything shifts? No words, no introduction, just energy. People stop talking. Eyes glance over. It's like the atmosphere quietly rearranges itself around them. That's not charisma. That's dominance. And it runs deeper than personality. It taps into something ancient, something wired into human survival. The instinct to follow authority. Now here's what most people don't want to admit. Obedience isn't a learned behavior. It's biological. The brain has evolved to seek out certainty and strength because following strong energy kept our ancestors alive. In dangerous environments, deferring to the person who projected the most control wasn't weakness. It was strategy. It meant safety, order, direction. So that instinct still lives in us. We feel it before we think it. When someone radiates authority, their presence speaks louder than their words. You sense that if things went wrong, they'd know what to do. The subconscious instantly categorizes them as higher status. It's not about logic. It's about emotional dominance, that invisible current of confidence, certainty, and command that pulls others into orbit. Here's the shocking part. Most authority has nothing to do with real power. It's perception. People obey what they believe is dominant, not necessarily what is. You see it everywhere. Fake gurus, corporate bosses, self-proclaimed leaders who have no substance but understand posture, tone, and certainty. They play the signals of dominance so convincingly that people submit automatically. Social psychology has proved this again and again. One of the most famous examples is the Milgram experiment. Participants were told by a man in a lab coat to administer electric shocks to another person. They could hear screams of pain, but the authority figure simply said, "Please continue." And they did. Most went all the way, believing they were harming someone just because an authoritative voice told them to. No threat, no force, just the illusion of legitimate power. So why does this happen? Because the brain craves hierarchy. It wants to know who's leading and who's following. When that's unclear, it creates anxiety. The moment someone steps in with certainty, not arrogance, but grounded, unwavering certainty, the tension dissolves. The group unconsciously assigns them authority. The others relax into obedience. It feels natural, almost comforting. That's why dominant energy isn't loud. It's calm. True authority doesn't need to shout. It doesn't need to prove. It just is. And everyone around feels it. There's a specific physiological reason for this. When someone carries low anxiety, steady breathing, controlled tone, and direct posture, it signals safety and power simultaneously. The mirror neurons in others begin to sync with that energy. Their heart rate lowers, their attention focuses, and their behavior starts aligning. That's obedience happening invisibly. But here's where it gets darker. People can weaponize that instinct. Entire systems of control are built on the illusion of authority. Uniforms, titles, symbols, even architecture. They all send subconscious signals that say, obey. A courtroom, a military base, a cathedral. These spaces are designed to make you feel small. You follow not because you agree, but because your biology is responding to dominance cues older than civilization itself. Yet dominance isn't only physical. Emotional dominance is even more powerful. When someone can stay composed under pressure while others panic, their calm becomes magnetic. That calm feels like control, and control feels like safety. That's why in a crisis, people look to whoever stays steady. That's the one their nervous system labels as leader. Here's something that'll make you see people differently. Watch any argument. The person who's more emotionally stable always ends up in control. They don't need to win logically. They win energetically. The other person's frustration, raised voice, flinching movements, all of that communicates lower dominance. It tells the subconscious who holds power. Authority is not in words. It's in the nervous system. You can cultivate this energy deliberately. Start by mastering your state before you ever open your mouth. Slow your breath. Drop your shoulders. Ground your body. Speak slowly. Look at people when they talk, not as if you're waiting to respond, but as if you're already certain of your place. The body leads the mind. When your body broadcasts dominance, your words start carrying it too. But remember, obedience always flows toward the most emotionally certain person. If you want influence, certainty is your currency. People don't follow truth, they follow conviction. Even when they disagree intellectually, they still feel the gravitational pull of certainty. That's why charismatic manipulators can control intelligent people. Not because their arguments make sense, but because they sound unshakable. And this doesn't just happen in groups. It happens one-on-one too. The person who maintains composure sets the frame. If you react, you're in their world. If you remain calm while they escalate, you pull them into yours. That's the invisible transfer of authority. It's not dominance through aggression. It's dominance through emotional stability. Here's a simple test of your own authority energy. The next time someone challenges you, pause. Don't rush to explain or defend. Just hold silence and steady eye contact. Most people will start filling that silence because they can't handle the tension. That's your proof. True authority isn't proven through words. It's revealed in how comfortable you are with power dynamics. Now, authority without awareness turns dangerous fast. If you start craving obedience, you've crossed into manipulation. The healthy form of dominance isn't about making people small. It's about making them feel secure enough to follow your lead. The moment you need to prove you're in control, you're already losing it. The most magnetic kind of authority is calm, grounded, benevolent. It doesn't demand respect. It evokes it. It doesn't force obedience. It earns it through unwavering certainty and emotional composure. People follow because they want to, not because they're afraid. And when you master that kind of energy, you don't chase influence anymore. Influence starts chasing you. Because human nature can't resist the gravitational pull of someone who looks, sounds, and feels like they already know the way. Emotional calibration. You can't control people if you can't read them. Real influence isn't about what you say. It's about what you sense. It's about tuning into the emotional frequency beneath the words, feeling the shifts in their breathing, tone, and tension, and adjusting yours until their state begins to mirror yours. That's emotional calibration. It's not just awareness. It's real, time emotional steering. Most people speak like they're throwing darts in the dark. They push their message without realizing the emotional landscape keeps changing second by second. But human emotion is liquid. It moves, it flows, it reacts. If you can feel that movement, you can shape it. That's how natural persuaders work. They don't force feelings. They guide them, moment by moment. Here's what most people never realize. Every conversation is an emotional exchange first and a logical one second. Before someone hears your words, their subconscious is scanning your tone, posture, and energy for safety and alignment. Are you a threat or an ally? Are you grounded or uncertain? Their nervous system makes that judgment in less than a second. If they feel your energy is off, no logic in the world will land. Emotional calibration starts with one skill: noticing. Not reacting, not analyzing, just noticing. The micro changes. A flicker of tension in the jaw, a slight breath hold, the eyes narrowing or widening. Those are emotional signals, not random movements. When you spot them, you're reading their internal map in real time. The next step is matching. You meet their energy where it is before you try to move it. If someone's anxious and you walk in overly cheerful, you create emotional dissonance. Their subconscious rejects your energy because it feels fake. But if you meet them where they are, mirror their tone, slow your rhythm to match their pace, something shifts. Their body starts feeling seen, understood. That's emotional rapport. And rapport is the foundation of steering. Once you've matched, you lead. You start changing your tone, posture, and breathing in the direction you want them to follow. If you want calm, you slow your breath and lower your voice. If you want energy, you increase tempo, add intensity. The human nervous system mirrors the most stable signal it encounters. That's why emotional calibration feels like magic. You're not telling people how to feel. You're teaching their body by example. But here's the part that separates amateurs from masters. Calibration never stops. You don't just lead once and assume it's done. You adjust constantly. Every facial micro-expression, every shift in eye focus, every hesitation is feedback. When their energy follows yours, you keep leading. When it resists, you recalibrate. You don't take it personally. You just steer the emotional current again. Think of it like dancing. You don't dominate the movement. You sense the rhythm and guide it. Emotional calibration is that dance, except the music is invisible. It's in tone, timing, silence, and micro-movement. There's real science behind it. Human beings have mirror neurons, specialized cells that make us feel what we see. When someone yawns, you yawn. When someone laughs, you smile. When someone panics, you tense. These neurons are constantly sensing emotional states between people, especially in close proximity. That's why strong emotional regulation becomes powerful influence. The most regulated nervous system wins. If you stay calm, grounded, slow, others begin to match it automatically. They might not notice it, but their body will start sensing. That's why great negotiators, therapists, even interrogators all share one trait: emotional control. They calibrate before they communicate. They read before they speak. Here's a real-world example. Imagine you're dealing with someone angry. If you meet their intensity head-on, you amplify it. They escalate, but if you acknowledge it, maybe with a slow nod, steady tone, and low volume, you create contrast. Their nervous system begins to slow down to match yours. You're leading them into calm without force, just through calibration. Now flip it. Say you're speaking to someone disinterested. If you stay low energy, you reinforce their apathy. But if you gradually inject a spark into your voice, use vivid words, lean forward slightly, they start waking up. Again, not because you told them to, but because their body is reading your cues. This is the secret of emotional steering. The body follows emotional coherence. When your tone, breathing, and expression align with your intention, people feel it. There's no resistance because nothing feels out of sync. You've created emotional gravity, but calibration also means sensitivity to feedback. The moment you get attached to outcome, you lose it. The more you try to control, the more tension you create, and tension kills connection. Real time steering happens through presence, not pressure. You're not thinking, you're feeling. You're aware enough to respond, calm enough to lead, and flexible enough to adjust instantly. This is why emotional calibration is one of the highest forms of influence. It's invisible, effortless, and deeply human. It doesn't rely on manipulation. It relies on awareness. When you can sense someone's internal state faster than they can, you can redirect it before they even realize what's happening. The trick is, you have to lead yourself first. Your emotional state is the tuning fork that sets the tone for every interaction. If you walk into a room nervous, the room mirrors it. If you walk in centered, the room stabilizes. The people around you will always calibrate to the most certain signal. So the real mastery isn't just reading others, it's reading yourself. Notice your own shifts, where your body tightens, where your breath shortens, where your tone changes. The moment you can regulate those, you become unshakable. And when you're unshakable, Everyone else unconsciously adjusts to you. That's emotional dominance at its most subtle level. Control through composure. You don't demand influence. You radiate it. You become the stable reference point in a world full of emotional chaos. People feel that and instinctively align. Because deep down, everyone's nervous system is searching for safety. And when they find someone who feels steady, confident, and calm in real time, obedience isn't even a decision, it's instinct. Linguistic traps. The language doesn't just describe reality. It creates it. The words people hear shape what they notice, what they believe, even what they remember. Most never realize it, but every conversation is a battlefield of perception. And the weapons are not arguments or logic. They're phrases. Carefully crafted combinations of words that steer thought without detection. These are linguistic traps. They work because the human brain doesn't process language passively. It reacts. It builds pictures, emotions, and conclusions the instant words are spoken. Say the phrase, "Don't think of a red apple," and your brain instantly paints one in full color. That's the first rule of linguistic control. The mind can't resist imagery. Even resistance reinforces the suggestion. When you understand that, you stop arguing with people and start designing the thoughts they'll argue with themselves. You don't have to push ideas. You build the language that makes those ideas feel obvious. One of the simplest traps is called presupposition. It's when a sentence carries an assumption the listener automatically accepts just by responding. For example, instead of saying, "Do you want to listen?" you say, "Are you more comfortable listening now or in a moment?" Both choices imply they will listen. The question hides the command. Their conscious mind focuses on choosing, while their subconscious accepts the premise. Another is linguistic framing, shaping how something is perceived before it's even evaluated. If I say, "Let me show you how this simple method works," I've already told your mind to expect simplicity. That expectation filters everything that follows. The brain rarely questions what's framed as truth. It just fills in details to confirm it. That's why political speech, sales copy, and persuasive media rely so heavily on framing. Call a tax a contribution, and it feels noble. Call the same thing a burden, and it feels oppressive. The facts don't change. The words do, and perception follows the words. But the real power comes when you stack these techniques subtly in conversation. You combine presupposition, emotional tone, and rhythm to build invisible mental funnels. The listener feels in control while walking straight into your chosen conclusion. Take a simple example. Imagine, you say, as you start realizing how natural this feels, you'll notice how your thoughts begin to line up clearly. That one sentence carries two presuppositions: that they will realize and that it will feel natural. Their mind can't reject it without processing it. By the time they even notice, their body has already aligned with the state you described. That's the thing about linguistic traps. They work because they bypass defense. The conscious mind loves arguing against direct statements, but it doesn't even notice structure. You can sneak entire beliefs through grammar. There's another trap called linguistic linkage, connecting two ideas so the mind treats them as one. You'll hear this everywhere in advertising. Sentences like, "People who care about their future choose this option." It implies that not choosing means not caring. The logic is paper thin, but emotionally it's airtight. Nobody wants to feel careless, so compliance becomes self-protection. This is the same trick used in high-pressure persuasion, linking behavior with identity. You're not asking someone to do something. You're asking them to be someone. And the human ego will always protect identity faster than it protects reason. Then there's conversational reframing, one of the most elegant linguistic manipulations there is. It's the art of changing the emotional meaning of something without changing the facts. Someone says, "I failed." You respond, "So you learned something most people never get the chance to." The event didn't change, but the frame did. Now the brain stores it as growth, not loss. You've just rewritten memory through language. Here's what's fascinating. Once you control the frame, you control the emotional tone of reality itself. People stop responding to events and start responding to your definitions of them. That's why great communicators can diffuse anger, sell impossible ideas, or inspire loyalty. They don't fight for attention. They rewire how attention works. There's a subtle trap that might be the most powerful of all: embedded negation. When you negate an idea while repeating it, the mind keeps the image but loses the word, not. For example, if a parent says, "Don't run," the child's brain only processes run. The visual activates, and the behavior follows. That's why skilled influencers speak in affirmative imagery. They describe what they want people to see, feel, and do, never what they want to avoid. Even timing and rhythm are part of the trap. The brain follows cadence like music. Slow pacing and downward tone imply authority. Upward tone and variable rhythm imply curiosity. When you mix these patterns deliberately, you can make people feel what you want them to feel without touching them. And it goes deeper. Every word carries emotional texture. Soft consonants soothe, sharp ones command. When you understand sound symbolism, you can anchor feelings through phonetics alone. That's why certain brand names feel gentle and others feel dominant before you even know what they sell. But here's the part most people forget. The power of language only works when it's grounded in state. If your tone and emotion don't match your words, the subconscious rejects them. Authenticity is the key that unlocks linguistic control. The words must sound congruent with who you appear to be. Otherwise, they collapse. So, if you want to use language to shape perception, start with awareness. Listen to your own phrases. Notice how often you plant unintended suggestions. How often you say things like, "I don't want to mess this up." You've already told your brain to visualize failure. Replace it with, "I'm focused and getting this right." Same meaning, entirely different command. That's the daily practice of linguistic precision. Learning to speak in ways that align thought and direction instead of scattering them. Because the mind follows words like a map, and whoever writes that map controls the journey. The final truth is this: every phrase you speak is either building resistance or dissolving it. The difference lies in structure, not intention. When you master linguistic traps, you don't push people to believe. You make belief feel like the only logical conclusion their mind could have reached. That's why language, in the hands of someone aware, isn't communication. It's control. Strategic silence. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is nothing. Not because you don't know what to say, but because silence pulls more weight than words ever can. Most people fear silence. They rush to fill it, to patch that awkward gap, to prove they're still in control. But the person who can hold silence without anxiety owns the frame. That's strategic silence. Influence through absence. When you go quiet at the right moment, you create psychological pressure. The other person's brain starts working overtime to fill the gap. They project, they interpret, they reveal themselves. And you stay still. You let their discomfort do the work for you. That's the shocking part. Silence doesn't just pause the conversation. It redirects control. It forces the other person to become hyper-aware of themselves. Their nervous system starts searching for approval, for reaction, for relief. And the longer you withhold it, the more power shifts toward you. There's a reason interrogators, negotiators, and leaders all use silence strategically. The brain hates uncertainty. It would rather receive bad news than no feedback at all. When you withhold your reaction, you take away the other person's emotional map. Now they have to guess where they stand. And the one who's guessing always loses power. Think about it. When someone challenges you, and you respond instantly, you're reacting to their rhythm. They lead, you follow. But if you pause, hold eye contact, and let that silence breathe, suddenly they're reacting to yours. You've flipped the dynamic. The silence becomes a mirror they can't escape. And here's the thing. Silence isn't emptiness. It's presence. It's the unspoken signal that says, I don't need to prove anything. That's what intimidates people. Not aggression, not dominance. Composure. When someone can stay quiet under tension, everyone else feels it. The energy shifts. There's real psychology behind this. Humans are pattern-seeking machines. We depend on feedback loops, cause and effect, question and response. Silence breaks that loop. The mind starts overanalyzing, trying to predict meaning. Did they agree? Are they judging me? Did I say something wrong? That internal uncertainty becomes emotional leverage. You haven't done anything. You've simply created space and let their anxiety fill it. But here's the nuance. Strategic silence isn't passive. It's not withdrawal. It's intentional stillness. It's using timing as a weapon. Too short, and it's just a pause. Too long, and it becomes confrontation. The mastery lies in knowing when to let silence stretch just far enough to make them move first. There's a rhythm to it. Speak, pause, observe. Let their body language reveal what their words won't. People fill silence with truth. They elaborate, justify, confess. They tell you what they think you need to hear. Every second of quiet is like a truth vacuum pulling authenticity to the surface. In negotiation, silence works like gravity. The first person to break it usually concedes. You make an offer, then stop. No fidgeting, no nervous laughter, no reassurance. Just space. The pressure builds until the other person fills it, often by giving you what you wanted. It feels subtle, but it's one of the oldest dominance techniques known to psychology. And silence doesn't only work in conflict. It's magnetic in attraction too. Mystery amplifies value. When you stop explaining yourself, you become intriguing. When you stop reacting, people lean in. Attention follows absence the same way light follows darkness. We crave what isn't immediately available. That's why the quiet, self-contained person in a group always draws eyes without saying a word. There's even a physiological element to it. When you go silent and stay calm, your breathing slows. Your heart rate stabilizes. The mirror neurons in others start sensing to your composure. Their body unconsciously calms down to match yours. Silence becomes contagious. You've turned your nervous system into a control mechanism. But strategic silence isn't just about manipulating others. It's also about controlling yourself. Every time you resist the urge to fill a gap, you train your emotions. You learn to tolerate uncertainty, to stay centered while others scramble for footing. That's real power. Not dominance through noise, but influence through stillness. Here's something most people never practice: responding after the silence has done its work. You wait, you let their reaction unfold, then you choose your moment. When you finally speak, your words carry weight because the silence carved out space for them. Every syllable lands harder because it's surrounded by absence. You can use this even in simple conversations. When someone tells you something emotional, pause before responding. Let the silence validate them. It tells their nervous system, "I heard you. I'm not rushing to fix it. I'm here." That creates connection far deeper than words can. Silence doesn't just control power. It also builds trust, because it signals presence without performance. Here's the paradox. The quieter you become, the more people reveal. The less you try to prove, the more people assume you already know. The less you react, the more influence you hold. That's why the most persuasive communicators are rarely the loudest. They're the ones who can hold stillness like a blade, precise, deliberate, patient. So start watching your own speech. Notice when you talk just to escape silence. Notice how your body tenses when pauses stretch too long. That tension is the exact signal others read as weakness. Train yourself to stay calm through it. The longer you can sit inside silence comfortably, the more dominant your presence becomes. Because silence, when mastered, isn't absence. It's control disguised as nothing. It's invisible gravity pulling attention, truth, and emotion toward you. Most people chase power through words. The few who understand silence make words chase them. And that's when you stop trying to be heard and start being felt. Mirror neurons and the subconscious rapport loop. You can feel it when it happens. That quiet, electric connection between two people. When the rhythm syncs, when conversation flows effortlessly, when you finish each other's thoughts without trying. It feels natural, but it's not luck. It's biology. It's your mirror neurons at work, silently creating what I call the subconscious rapport loop. Mirror neurons are the brain's way of reading and reflecting others. When you see someone smile, your brain lights up in the same pattern as if you were smiling yourself. When you watch someone in pain, you don't just observe it, you feel it. The body mimics emotion before the mind analyzes it. That's the core of empathy, but it's also the hidden foundation of influence. Because if people mirror what they see, whoever controls the signal controls the state. When your emotional rhythm is stable, calm, and grounded, their nervous system matches it. When you're anxious, they tighten up too. It's not something you tell them to do. It happens automatically. The subconscious can't help it. It's wired to sync. Now here's the part most people miss. Rapport isn't about similarity. It's about synchronization. You don't need to be like someone to connect with them. You just need to move at the same tempo. Breathing, tone, micro-expressions. Once those align, the brain releases oxytocin, the trust chemical. The person relaxes, lowers their guard, and the rapport loop locks in. The loop works like this. You project an emotional signal. Their mirror neurons reflect it. Their emotional state shifts, which then reflects back to you, reinforcing your own signal. The cycle strengthens with every exchange. If you're aware of it, you can shape it. If you're not, you'll be shaped by it. This is why emotional awareness is power. Every social interaction is a feedback system. You are constantly broadcasting, receiving, and adjusting, mostly without realizing it. The person with the most conscious control over their internal state ends up leading the loop. That's why calm people tend to calm others, and confident people make others feel secure. their nervous system becomes the dominant signal. Think about how tension spreads in a group. One person panics, others start mirroring that energy within seconds. But if one person stays centered, breathing slowly, grounded in tone, that calm radiates outward just as fast. The mirror neurons of the group reorient around the most stable signal. The body doesn't ask who's right. It follows who's steady. That's the subconscious rapport loop in action. A constant dance of emotional resonance, shifting moment by moment. The skill isn't to manipulate it, but to sense it, to feel when alignment happens and when it breaks. When rapport is strong, communication feels effortless. When it's broken, even truth sounds like resistance. The best communicators don't chase connection. They create emotional gravity. They adjust their breathing to the rhythm of the other person's speech, match posture subtly, use tone that mirrors emotional energy, and then, once the connection locks in, they start leading. They slow down their cadence, drop their tone, or soften their body language. The other person unconsciously follows. That's the hidden hand of influence. Gentle, invisible, automatic. There's a simple experiment that proves this. Next time you're talking to someone, start to mirror their posture. If they lean forward, you lean slightly forward. If they cross their legs, you wait a few seconds, then do the same. After a while, change your position. Lean back or adjust your breathing. Watch them follow. That's rapport shifting direction. You've taken the lead in the subconscious loop. But you don't just mirror movement. You mirror emotional state. When someone speaks with tension, you match their intensity at first, then gradually ease it. You're teaching their nervous system a new pattern through example. Their subconscious doesn't realize you're guiding them. It just feels alignment. And alignment feels like trust. The deeper truth is that people don't respond to what you say. They respond to how they feel when you say it. Mirror neurons make your internal state contagious. Your calmness, your conviction, your curiosity, all of it spreads faster than words. That's why control of self is control of others. There's even more happening beneath awareness. When two people sync deeply, their heart rates begin to align. Their pupils dilate together. Their micro-movements synchronize. This is physiological rapport, the body's silent agreement. You've probably felt it. When conversation feels timeless, when silence feels comfortable, when connection feels effortless. That's the loop fully activated. But the loop can also work against you. If you're unaware, you'll start mirroring negative states. Frustration, anxiety, impatience. Without realizing it, someone's stress becomes yours, and now you're broadcasting it back, amplifying the loop. That's why emotional discipline matters. Awareness lets you break unhelpful resonance and recenter the energy. So here's how to use this consciously. First, observe. Before you speak, notice their breathing, shoulders, and tone. Second, match subtly, not mimicry, just rhythm. Third, once you feel rapport, start leading the loop toward the emotional state you want to create. Slow your pace, breathe deeper, soften your voice. The subconscious follows the path of least resistance, and calm energy always feels easier to follow than chaos. What's fascinating is how quickly this works. In under a minute, a steady emotional signal can override tension, fear, or defensiveness. Not through argument, but through resonance. You're not convincing their mind. You're training their nervous system. That's the hidden layer beneath influence. Rapport isn't a trick, it's synchronization. The more control you have over your own emotional broadcast, the easier it is to direct someone else's. The body knows before the mind decides. So the next time you walk into a room, realize you're already influencing it before a single word leaves your mouth. Every gesture, every breath, every flicker of expression tells the room what frequency to tune to. The question is, are you tuning to them, or are they tuning to you? Because in the end, real influence isn't about power over others. It's about mastery of your own signal, calm enough to anchor, strong enough to lead, aware enough to feel the loop forming in real time. When you can do that, connection stops being effort. It becomes gravity, and gravity doesn't ask permission. It just pulls. Gaslighting and ethical boundaries. Every kind of power has a shadow. Influence can elevate, connect, and transform. Or it can destroy trust, warp perception, and hollow out everything that makes connection real. Gaslighting is what happens when influence crosses the line from persuasion into manipulation. It's not skill anymore. It's distortion. Gaslighting isn't just lying. It's the strategic erosion of another person's sense of reality. It's when someone bends facts, emotions, and memories so subtly that the other person starts doubting themselves. Over time, that confusion becomes dependence. The victim stops trusting their own perception and starts relying on the manipulator for clarity. That's not influence. That's psychological theft. The truth is, the tools of dark influence can be used in both directions. The same techniques that create trust can also manufacture control. The difference isn't in the method. It's in the intent behind it. When you use influence to guide awareness, to help people see what's already there, it strengthens them. When you use it to hide truth or secure dominance, it weakens them. And eventually, it weakens you too. Because power without ethics always eats itself. It starts as control over others and ends as loss of self-control. The manipulator begins believing their own distortions. They get high on their ability to bend perception and forget that reality always pushes back eventually. Here's what gaslighting looks like in real time. You express a feeling, and the other person denies it happened. You remember an event, and they say your memory is wrong. They minimize your reactions, twist your words, or flip the story until you start wondering if you're the problem. That confusion is intentional. It's how they gain leverage. But gaslighting isn't always loud or obvious. Sometimes it hides in polished language. Subtle dismissals wrapped in calm tone, small distortions disguised as kindness. The most dangerous manipulators aren't the ones who yell. They're the ones who sound reasonable while quietly dismantling your confidence in what's real. In influence work, this is the red line. When your communication starts making someone doubt their own sanity or autonomy, you've crossed into darkness that can't be justified. Even if it gets results in the moment, it poisons everything long-term, your relationships, your reputation, and eventually your sense of purpose. Because here's the deeper truth. Influence was never meant to erase other people's perception. It was meant to expand it. The real art is guiding awareness without taking ownership of it. Ethical influence empowers choice. Unethical manipulation replaces it. If you want to measure where you stand, ask yourself one simple question: would this person thank me if they saw everything I'm doing behind the scenes? If the answer is no, you're not leading, you're deceiving. And deception always creates debt. It might look like you're winning, but what you're really doing is accumulating silence, resentment, and karma that will return. Psychologically, gaslighting triggers something called cognitive dissonance. that grinding tension between what someone feels and what they're told. To reduce the pain, the mind starts bending itself to fit the story. Over time, that destroys self-trust. It's one of the most corrosive experiences a human being can go through. So when you study dark influence, you have to carry responsibility with it. Like a loaded weapon, you never point at something you don't intend to destroy. Real mastery isn't about control. It's about awareness, the ability to see manipulation without becoming it, to understand influence deeply enough that you can use it to protect, not corrupt, because once you know how people's minds can be bent, you have a moral duty to keep your own straight. There's a quiet kind of strength in restraint. Anyone can manipulate when they're desperate, but it takes presence to hold back, to let truth do the work instead of distortion. That's the difference between the magician and the con artist. One creates wonder, the other creates confusion. Both use illusion. Only one uses it to reveal something honest. The line between those two can be razor thin, which is why intention has to be your compass. Influence done ethically never hides the truth. It helps people access it faster. It never steals free will. It invites it. It never makes someone smaller. It expands their understanding of themselves. And if you're serious about mastering influence, you'll eventually realize that integrity isn't just morality, it's leverage. People can feel when your words align with truth. Their nervous system relaxes. Their resistance drops. Authenticity has a frequency that manipulation can't fake. When you speak from alignment, people trust you instinctively. When you speak from agenda, they feel the static even if they can't explain why. The irony is, the most effective influencers don't need dark tactics. Their presence alone shifts people because it's grounded in authenticity. They don't chase compliance. They invite resonance. They don't twist perception. They clarify it. The deeper their self-awareness, the more powerful their communication becomes. That's the paradox most people miss. The only real protection against being manipulated is understanding how manipulation works. And the only real protection against becoming a manipulator is having something deeper than power to serve. Purpose keeps the knife pointed in the right direction. So as you explore the dark side of influence, remember this darkness is a tool, not a destination. It exists to reveal where integrity ends and power begins. Use what you learn to illuminate, not to confuse. Because the moment you start making people doubt their reality, you stop being a guide and start being a ghost, haunting the very minds you could have awakened. The truth will always outlast manipulation. Influence that builds on deception crumbles the moment silence falls. But influence built on clarity, on awareness, empathy, and choice, becomes something else entirely. It becomes leadership, and leadership, real leadership, never hides behind illusion. It uses truth as the ultimate form of persuasion. The yes ladder and the momentum effect. People think persuasion is about that one big yes, the dramatic agreement, the final decision. But that's not how the mind actually works. Big decisions are built from a series of small ones. Each tiny yes creates psychological momentum. It changes the brain's wiring from resistance to compliance. That's the yes ladder. The oldest, simplest, and most quietly effective persuasion technique on Earth. Here's the psychology behind it. The human mind craves consistency. Once someone commits, even in the smallest way, their subconscious wants to stay congruent with that choice. Every new yes reinforces identity. I said yes, therefore I'm the kind of person who says yes. It's not logic, It's self-image. We want to believe we act with reason, but most of our decisions are really just momentum. The yes ladder works by stacking commitments in sequence. You start with something too easy to refuse, a small agreement that feels harmless. Once they say yes, you move to something slightly bigger, then bigger again. Each step reaffirms the story they're telling themselves, that they're agreeing because it makes sense. But what really makes sense to the subconscious is staying consistent. Salespeople use this constantly, often without realizing it. They'll start with questions like, "You care about your future, right? You want to make smart decisions, right?" Each yes lowers the next barrier. By the time the real offer arrives, the mind has already built the rhythm of agreement. To say no now would mean breaking the pattern, and the brain resists breaking patterns even more than it resists losing money. But this doesn't just work in sales. It works in human interaction, relationships, leadership, even self-discipline. When you want someone to follow your lead, don't start with the end goal. Start with a rhythm of small affirmations. A nod, a subtle agreement, a shared truth. You're not convincing them of a new belief. You're guiding their existing momentum toward yours. There's a reason the brain does this. It hates friction. Every yes releases a small dose of dopamine, a chemical reward for progress. The mind associates agreement with harmony and disagreement with tension. The yes ladder exploits that bias. It replaces pressure with flow. People don't feel forced. They feel aligned. That's why it works even on people who think they can't be influenced. Imagine you're leading someone through a decision. You don't push. You build rhythm. You say things they can easily agree with. Simple truths, shared experiences, small acknowledgments. Their mind starts trusting the pattern. This person makes sense. This conversation feels good. And then, when you present your real ask, the yes comes naturally. It doesn't feel manipulated. It feels earned. The momentum effect is what happens next. Once someone has acted in a direction, they'll justify it emotionally to stay consistent. That's why small commitments often lead to huge changes. Sign one petition, you're more likely to volunteer. Try one free class, you're more likely to buy the membership. Post one opinion online, you're more likely to defend it forever. Every small yes builds a mental pathway that says, "I've already started. Might as well continue." This is the same mechanism that drives habits. The hardest part isn't doing something, it's starting. Once motion begins, inertia takes over. The yes ladder uses that inertia socially. You turn psychological movement into emotional gravity. Each step forward pulls the next one closer. But here's the deeper layer. The yes ladder isn't about tricking people. It's about guiding energy. You're creating an emotional rhythm where agreement feels safe and natural. You're aligning with their momentum instead of fighting it. The mistake most people make in persuasion is going for the big ask too soon. They collide with resistance instead of building rapport. The yes ladder removes collision. It turns the conversation into flow. There's also an ethical dimension to this. If you use the yes ladder to push someone into something against their real interest, you're planting a psychological time bomb. The moment they realize they were led, the momentum reverses. They'll distrust not just you, but anyone who speaks with confidence. That's how manipulation kills credibility. Used correctly, though, this technique builds genuine alignment. For example, in leadership, you can use the yes ladder to create unity. You start by agreeing on values, shared goals, things everyone feels connected to. Then you stack that momentum toward action. By the time the decision comes, it feels like a collective yes, not an order. That's ethical influence. Direction through alignment, not pressure. The momentum effect also explains why rejection feels so sharp. When someone suddenly says no after a string of yeses, it breaks the emotional rhythm. The brain feels it like a stumble while walking. That's why great communicators don't fight rejection. They reestablish flow. They circle back to a smaller yes, rebuild pace, and continue upward. The secret is never letting the rhythm die completely. If you pay attention, you'll start seeing the yes ladder everywhere. It's in marketing funnels, in political speeches, in storytelling, even in romantic attraction. Every time someone gets you nodding along, they're building that pattern. The trick isn't spotting it. It's learning to steer it consciously instead of unconsciously obeying it. And here's something subtle most people never notice. The yes ladder doesn't always start with words. It can start with emotions. Get someone to feel safe, seen, or curious. That's their first internal yes. You're not asking out loud. You're creating the conditions for agreement. The body agrees before the mind catches up. That's the deeper layer of the momentum effect. It's not about compliance. It's about energy flow, emotional physics. Once direction begins, resistance weakens. The same force that makes habits stick makes influence stick. Whether it's movement toward a product, a belief, or a relationship, the first yes is the seed of inevitability. So remember this: every yes is a step, and every step makes the next one smaller. Influence isn't about pressure. It's about sequence. If you can guide the rhythm, you can guide the outcome, and no one will ever feel pushed, only pulled by their own momentum. Because in the end, the most powerful persuasion doesn't sound like persuasion at all. It feels like alignment. It feels like gravity. Fear, desire, and validation. Every decision a human being makes can be traced back to three emotional levers: fear, desire, and validation. Everything else, every excuse, every layer of logic we build on top of it, is just decoration. The truth is, people don't move for facts. They move to feel safe, to feel fulfilled, or to feel seen. If you can touch those three levers, you can move almost anyone. Let's start with fear. Fear is the oldest motivator in the brain. It's survival energy. It narrows focus, spikes adrenaline, and tells the body, do something now. But here's the paradox. Fear doesn't have to be loud or dramatic. Most of the time it shows up as quiet discomfort, the whisper that says, "What if I miss out? What if I fail? What if I'm not enough?" That low hum of anxiety runs underneath almost every human action. Influence built on fear works because the brain is wired to avoid pain faster than it seeks pleasure. Show someone what they might lose, and they'll react more strongly than if you show them what they might gain. That's why headlines start with danger. That's why urgency sells. That's why warnings stick longer than promises. Fear anchors attention. But if you stop there, you create paralysis. Too much fear freezes the nervous system. That's where desire comes in. Desire is motion. It pulls instead of pushes. It turns fear's tension into direction. When you describe what's possible, the freedom, the status, the comfort, the love, you give the mind a place to escape to. You're converting survival energy into aspiration. Desire works because it paints emotional pictures the subconscious can almost feel. The brain doesn't know the difference between vivid imagination and real experience. That's why visualization works. When you describe desire with sensory precision, the listener's body starts releasing dopamine, the chemical of pursuit. They don't just want it, they start to feel like they already have it. That's the sweet spot where influence becomes magnetic, but fear and desire alone can still feel transactional. You need the third lever to make it personal: validation. This is the one nobody talks about enough, because it's invisible, but it's everything. Validation is the deep human need to feel seen, understood, and accepted. It's not about praise. It's about emotional recognition. When someone feels validated, they stop defending themselves. Their walls drop, and their mind opens. That's why people follow leaders who make them feel understood. That's why compliments mean more when they feel specific and real. Validation doesn't just soften people. It rewires how they process information. The moment someone feels emotionally safe, they stop filtering everything through threat. They start listening with curiosity instead of caution. You can combine these three levers like chords in a song. Start with a small touch of fear. What happens if nothing changes? Then lift with desire. What could life feel like if it did? And finish with validation. You deserve that change, and you're capable of it. The mind can't resist that pattern. You've built urgency, direction, and safety all in one flow. But here's the trap. When used carelessly, these same levers become manipulation. If you amplify fear without resolution, you breed anxiety. If you amplify desire without truth, you breed addiction. If you fake validation, you breed dependence. The difference between influence and exploitation is intention. Are you helping people move toward awareness? Or are you using their emotions as strings to pull? In dark influence, these levers are often disguised. Fear is hidden under subtle scarcity, desire under flattery, validation under fake empathy. It feels powerful in the moment, but it burns out fast. The person may comply, but they'll never trust you again. You've triggered instinct, not loyalty, and instinct forgets quickly once the stimulus fades. The ethical use of emotional levers is about alignment, not manipulation. You don't create fear where none exists. You reveal it. You don't invent desire. You clarify it. You don't fake validation. You give it where it's real. The power comes from resonance, not deceit. If you've ever been truly inspired by someone, they probably used all three levers without you noticing. They made you aware of what you were afraid of losing. They showed you what you could become, and they made you feel worthy of that transformation. That's the formula behind every speech that moves nations, every ad that sells millions, every mentor who changes a life. The science behind it is simple but profound. Fear activates the amygdala, the brain's alarm system. Desire activates the nucleus accumbens, the reward center. Validation activates the prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for meaning and self-awareness. When those three regions fire together, emotion and logic stop fighting. The whole system aligns. That's why you feel clarity when someone truly influences you. It's not hypnosis. It's coherence. If you want to master influence, train yourself to hear these levers in others. Listen for the fears they won't admit, the desires they disguise as goals, the validation they quietly crave. Speak to those without exploiting them. When people feel you understand those layers, their trust becomes automatic, influence becomes effortless, and turn the same awareness inward. Notice your own levers. What fear drives your ambition? What desire shapes your choices? What kind of validation still hooks you? Because whoever understands their own emotional wiring stops being easy to manipulate. Awareness protects as much as it empowers. Fear desire, and validation. 3 simple words that explain why people say yes, why they stay stuck, and why they follow others even when it hurts them. These aren't just levers of influence. They're the architecture of emotion itself. And once you learn to see them clearly, you don't just influence others. You understand humanity at its core. The question isn't whether you'll use them. You already do. The real question is whether you'll use them consciously to build trust, clarity, and momentum, or unconsciously to chase short-term control, because influence without empathy is just manipulation in disguise, and power without compassion always collapses under its own weight. The strongest influence isn't the one that pulls people by their fears or their cravings. It's the one that helps them see those emotions clearly and still choose freely. That's not manipulation. That's leadership. Frame wars. Every conversation is a battle of frames. Every relationship, every argument, every negotiation, all of it is 2 realities colliding to see which one becomes dominant. A frame is not just an opinion. It's a worldview, a lens that defines what something means. Whoever controls meaning controls perception, and whoever controls perception controls behavior. That's why frame control is the hidden core of power. The mistake people make is thinking influence happens through logic or volume. It doesn't. It happens through context, through the frame. The frame decides what's important, what's right, what's possible. Change the frame, and you change the entire emotional logic of the situation without touching the facts. Imagine someone insults you. The weak frame reacts, defends, explains. The strong frame reframes, sees the insult as noise, as evidence of insecurity, as irrelevant to their emotional state. The person who reacts loses. The person who defines reality wins. That's the essence of a frame war. But here's the thing. Most frame wars aren't loud. They're invisible. They happen in microseconds through tone, posture, timing, and presence. The way someone pauses before speaking, the way they hold eye contact or break it, the subtle confidence of how they occupy space, all of that communicates whose world this interaction takes place in. Frames collide when 2 people try to impose meaning at the same time. One says, "This is serious." The other says, "This is funny." One says, "This is a problem." The other says, "This is an opportunity." The stronger nervous system wins. Power dynamics are not intellectual. They're emotional physics. Whoever feels more certain about their interpretation of reality automatically sets the tone. That's why confidence is so magnetic. It's not charm. It's frame stability. The confident person doesn't fight to convince you. They simply stay rooted in their version of the world long enough for yours to start bending toward it. That's what dominance really is. Emotional gravity. The trick to winning frame wars isn't aggression. It's congruence. You hold your frame so consistently that contradiction collapses. Most people break their own frame the moment they seek approval. The second you start explaining why you're right, you've already accepted their definition of power. That you need to justify yourself. True frame control is silent. It's the refusal to leave your world. Here's where it gets interesting. Frames can be broken strategically. Sometimes you need to shatter the current power dynamic to reset the energy. You do that by introducing surprise. A move so outside expectation that it destabilizes the other person's emotional balance. It can be humor, silence, or even non-reaction. The shock breaks their loop, and in that microsecond of confusion, the frame becomes fluid again. That's your opening to rebuild it. Rebuilding a frame isn't about dominance. It's about leadership. Once you create uncertainty, you define new meaning before the other person can. You guide attention toward a different interpretation, not through force, but through calm clarity. The faster you can turn chaos into coherence, the more authority your frame carries. This is why some people walk into a room and instantly shift the atmosphere. They're not louder or more impressive. Their internal frame is simply stronger. They've decided who they are and how things mean to them, and the world bends around that decision. Everyone else adjusts without realizing it. But there's a dark side to frame control, when it's used to dominate rather than direct. That's where manipulation and coercion begin. If your frame depends on making others small, you're not leading, you're draining. And over time, even if you win, you lose. Because every frame built on suppression eventually fractures under resentment. The goal isn't to destroy other frames, it's to build one strong enough that others want to step into it willingly. Psychologically, this all connects to the brain's need for certainty. Humans crave a stable sense of meaning. When someone projects unwavering confidence, the brain relaxes. It says, "This person knows. This feels safe." That's why followers seek leaders and why indecision feels painful. Frame control is really emotional stability projected outward. The art, then, is to lead frames ethically, to turn frame wars into frame dances, to recognize when someone else is trying to dominate through emotional pressure and not meet them on that battlefield. You stay calm. You absorb, you observe, and you respond from your own center. You reframe through language and state. For example, when someone says, "You don't understand," instead of defending yourself, you can calmly say, "Help me see what you mean." You just flipped the frame. You made them define the meaning on your terms. Cooperation instead of accusation. That's frame redirection in real time. The more emotionally aware you become, the less you fight frames and the more you sculpt them. You'll start feeling when power shifts, when someone's energy pulls or yields. You'll know when to hold your position, when to soften, when to mirror, when to reframe entirely. Every interaction becomes a subtle dance of meaning instead of a struggle for validation. And that's the real secret. Frame control isn't about crushing others. It's about anchoring yourself so deeply that no one can pull you out of alignment. The stronger your sense of meaning, the less you need to impose it. People feel that, and they start aligning naturally. At the highest level, frame wars disappear. There's no battle left, just resonance. Your reality speaks for itself. Your calm becomes contagious. Your clarity becomes leadership. And that's when you stop fighting for power, because you've become the source of it. The power of strategic vulnerability and emotional baiting. Vulnerability is one of the most misunderstood forms of power. People think it's weakness, a crack in the armor, something you hide until you can fix it. But in influence, vulnerability can be a weapon, not because it manipulates pity, but because it manipulates perception. When you show controlled vulnerability, you create the illusion of transparency. People relax. They stop guarding themselves. They think, "This person's being real. I can trust them." And trust opens the door that persuasion walks through. It's not about crying on command or exposing your pain for sympathy. It's about strategic calibration, choosing what to reveal, how much to reveal, and when to reveal it. Real vulnerability says, "I'm human." Strategic vulnerability says, "I'm human," in exactly the way that lowers your defenses. There's a psychological reason it works. The brain is wired to mirror emotional states through something called mirror neurons. When someone appears emotionally open, we unconsciously match that state. Openness triggers openness. It creates resonance. It's not logic. It's biological empathy. So when you show a trace of genuine vulnerability, the other person starts aligning emotionally without realizing it. But here's where it turns dark. The same empathy that creates connection can be hijacked. That's what emotional baiting is. Vulnerability used as a lure. It's when someone shares a story of pain, struggle, or sincerity not to connect, but to hook, to make you feel responsible for their emotions, to create a moral imbalance where you feel guilty saying no. The manipulator doesn't demand compliance directly. They make you want to comply to avoid hurting them. It's emotional debt disguised as authenticity. You start thinking, I can't walk away now. They opened up to me. But that's the trap. They opened just enough to make you stay, not to let you in. In dark influence, emotional baiting is a subtle form of control. It doesn't trigger fear. It triggers compassion. And compassion, when unguarded, can override logic. You stop evaluating the situation objectively and start reacting emotionally. The bait works because it flips the frame instead of them needing you. It feels like you need to protect them. That shift of emotional responsibility is the core of the manipulation. To see how deep this runs, look at relationships built on guilt. The person who says, after everything I've done for you, or I just thought you were different. They're not asking, they're baiting. They're using selective vulnerability to make you question your own integrity. The moment you start defending your kindness, they own the frame. But strategic vulnerability isn't always manipulative. In ethical influence, it's the bridge that connects emotion to credibility. If you're too polished, people don't trust you. If you're too broken, they can't follow you. The sweet spot is controlled imperfection. Enough humanity to be relatable. Enough strength to be respected. You show that you understand the chaos of emotion, but aren't ruled by it. That balance is magnetic. Think of a leader who shares a story about failure before revealing what they learned from it. That's strategic vulnerability. It creates empathy first, then authority. People trust leaders who've bled and healed. It's not performance. It's emotional sequencing. Vulnerability first, wisdom second. The order matters. Now, emotional baiting flips that sequence. It leads with vulnerability, but never gets to resolution. It keeps the wound open to sustain control. The manipulator pretends to be fragile to keep others walking on eggshells. The subtext becomes, if you leave me, you're the bad guy. That's not vulnerability. That's weaponized weakness. To master influence ethically, you have to feel the difference between real and strategic vulnerability, both in yourself and in others. Real vulnerability feels clean. It invites connection without pressure. Strategic vulnerability feels intentional but safe. Emotional baiting feels heavy. You walk away drained, not inspired. Here's the inner mechanism. True vulnerability lowers defenses on both sides. Baiting lowers defenses only on yours. In other words, authentic vulnerability is shared risk, manipulation is one-sided risk disguised as connection. The second someone uses emotion as leverage instead of language, the frame turns toxic. So how do you use vulnerability powerfully without crossing the line? You make it a story, not a strategy. You reveal enough truth to build empathy, but not to create dependence. You use your pain as a bridge, not a leash. You never share to be saved, you share to serve. When people feel that distinction, They trust you deeper than any polished authority ever could. In practice, that means timing matters. Vulnerability too early looks like neediness. Too late looks like calculation. But when it lands in the middle of emotional tension, it transforms the energy instantly. A single honest admission, like saying, "This scares me too," can drop walls faster than an hour of persuasion, because authenticity cuts through resistance like a blade. The power of vulnerability lies in how it disarms the ego. The ego wants to fight, prove, and defend. Vulnerability invites. It dissolves conflict without needing to win. That's why it's so dangerous in the wrong hands. It looks like softness, but it's control by surrender. And that's the paradox. To the untrained eye, vulnerability looks weak. To the manipulator, it's bait. But to the master of influence, it's leverage. Not over others, but over emotion itself. It's the art of showing just enough humanity to bypass resistance while maintaining authority. Use it consciously. Because every time you reveal a truth, you create an opening. That opening can lead to trust or to control. The difference lies in your intention. Are you sharing to connect or to capture? Real power doesn't hide behind perfection. It uses vulnerability to anchor presence. It says, "I'm human and I'm still grounded." It doesn't beg for sympathy. It commands respect through authenticity. That's the essence of strategic vulnerability. And once you learn to see emotional baiting for what it is, you stop falling for it. You start feeling when someone's story is real and when it's being used as a leash. You stop confusing pain with truth and emotion with honesty. That awareness is what separates the influenced from the influencer. The one who reacts from the one who decides. The one who gets pulled into stories from the one who writes them. And in that moment of awareness, you stop being bait and start becoming power. Energy and tonality manipulation for instant dominance. People talk about words like they're the main tool of influence, but words are just noise without energy behind them. The truth is, people don't follow language. They follow tone. They don't believe logic. They believe emotion. And emotion rides on energy. The way you use your voice, the rhythm, the pressure, the silence between words. That's what tells the nervous system whether to submit or resist. Tonality is dominance in sound form. When you walk into a room, your body is already speaking before you say a word. Your energy announces your frame. Calm, grounded energy says authority. Fast, scattered energy says insecurity. People can't consciously explain why they trust one person and not another, but their body knows. It's reading micro signals of tension, breath, rhythm, and pitch. That's energy communication. Think about the last time someone spoke with absolute calm under pressure. No rush, no panic, just steady tone and presence. You could feel it, right? That slow rhythm makes the listener sync their breathing to yours. And once someone's breath syncs to yours, their state follows. That's dominance through regulation. You're controlling their nervous system through pacing. Psychologically, humans are wired to defer to whoever regulates emotion better. The brain says, "This person feels certain. I can relax." Certainty is dominance. And tonality is how certainty gets transmitted. It's not about speaking loudly. Loudness can actually reveal insecurity. Dominant tone is slow, deliberate, low, and certain. It doesn't rise at the end of sentences. It drops. It lands like a period instead of a question. That drop tells the subconscious, there's no negotiation here. The message is final. The higher your tone rises at the end, the more it signals uncertainty, like you're seeking approval. The lower it falls, the more it signals control. It's simple biology. Low tones resonate in the chest, and the body associates that with size and safety. That's why deeper voices feel powerful. They physically vibrate in a way that calms or commands others. Energy and tone also define emotional framing. If you speak about something stressful with calm energy, people reinterpret it as manageable. If you speak about something small with intensity, people feel urgency. The meaning of the words changes depending on the emotional charge behind them. That's the real art, not just choosing words, but choosing states. Energy is contagious. Whatever emotional frequency you project, the other person's mirror neurons match. So if your tone carries tension, they'll feel tense. If your tone carries grounded certainty, they'll mirror that. Influence starts with energetic leadership. Your ability to choose your internal state and transmit it cleanly. Most people leak emotion. Masters broadcast it. Here's a simple truth. You can't fake energy. You can fake tone for a few seconds, but if your internal state doesn't match, your micro signals will expose you. Dominance doesn't come from pretending to be powerful. It comes from being settled. Real control is quiet because it doesn't need validation. That's why someone calm under pressure commands more respect than someone loud under excitement. Watch any great leader or performer. They control emotional tempo. When they speak fast, it's to spark energy. When they pause, it's to anchor attention. They know silence is sound too. The absence of tone creates tension. That tension pulls attention like gravity. Strategic silence amplifies dominance because it forces others to fill the gap. In negotiation or confrontation, the person who's comfortable with silence wins. Silence is energetic pressure. It makes the other person reveal their position, soften their tone, or rush to break the tension. Every time they do, they give away control. You don't dominate by force. You dominate by stability. Tonality also directs emotion. Lower tones create authority. Warm tones create trust. Crisp, precise tones create credibility. When you blend them intentionally, you can shift perception in real time. For example, start warm to open connection, then drop lower and slower when it's time to command action. The transition feels natural, but signals hierarchy. There's also the power of emotional contrast. If you stay in one tone too long, you lose impact. The brain tunes out. But when you alternate between intensity and calm, people feel the movement. You create emotional rhythm. That rhythm is hypnotic. Not because it manipulates, but because it feels alive. Influence lives in dynamic contrast. Here's the deeper layer most never reach: energy alignment. Every thought has an emotional frequency. When your words, tone, and energy all align with that frequency, the listener feels coherence. That's when influence becomes effortless. The body feels truth even before the mind interprets it. You can't learn that from a script. You learn it from presence, from full attention in the moment. In dark influence, this understanding gets weaponized. Manipulators use warmth to disarm and authority to dominate, switching tone like a chess player moves pieces. They know how to create emotional confusion, to sound safe while asserting control. It works, but it burns trust fast, because the body always detects incongruence. Ethical power comes from congruent energy. It's when what you feel, what you say, and how you sound are one. That kind of tonality doesn't need tricks. It just resonates. It's the sound of someone who knows themselves, and that self-knowledge is magnetic. The goal isn't to fake dominance. It's to embody calm control so deeply that your tone carries authority, without effort. That's the kind of energy people want to follow, not because they're intimidated, but because they feel safer around it. Your voice is your emotional fingerprint. It tells the world how much control you have over yourself. And the moment your internal state stabilizes, your external influence multiplies. So when you speak, don't just think about the words. Think about the silence around them. Think about how your breath moves through the space. Think about what your tone tells their body before your message reaches their mind. Because influence doesn't start with what you say. It starts with how you sound when you say nothing at all. Advanced NLP manipulation patterns. You ever meet someone and leave the conversation with the odd feeling that you agreed to things you never intended to, while also thinking you made those choices yourself? That eerie ease is what advanced NLP manipulation patterns are built to produce. They are not tricks you catch at a glance. They are architecture for attention, language, and memory that quietly reshapes how people process options and decide. Here's the part that surprises people. These techniques work because they speak to the parts of the brain that prefer habit over deliberation. The primitive systems that conserve energy, avoid conflict, and seek predictability respond to pattern and rhythm long before the conscious mind footprints a verdict. So when language, pacing, and suggestion line up, decisions feel like reflections instead of interventions. That's what makes these patterns powerful and, if misused, dangerous. What the manuals rarely say is that advanced patterns are less about new secrets and more about combining simple levers in precise order. You pace reality first. Describe what is obviously true in the moment so the listener keeps nodding along. Small agreements lower resistance. Then you embed directional language that presupposes the next step. Those embedded moves hide requests inside statements people unconsciously accept. Finally, you anchor emotion to choice, so the visceral memory matches the decision. When these pieces snap together, the listener supplies the reasoning, while the subconscious has already decided. It works in ways people rarely notice. Imagine a client who is skeptical. You spend a minute validating the objection, verbally mapping the fear, and mirroring body language. That alignment buys permission. Once you hold that mirror, you plant a simple presupposition that makes the solution feel inevitable. Because the brain prefers to maintain internal consistency, it will manufacture rationales to support what it now feels is appropriate. The result looks like free choice, but it was carefully choreographed. There are specific patterns that keep showing up because they reliably open doors. Embedded commands are one of them. These are brief action phrases nested in longer conversational sentences that the listener processes as part of a natural flow, not as explicit orders. Another is pattern interrupt. You break predictable rhythm with an unexpected word, pause, or gesture to momentarily destabilize habitual thought. In that microsecond of loosened habit, a new frame can be introduced. Then there is pacing and leading. Match someone's language, tone, and tempo until their system settles, then gently shift the rhythm to lead them toward the desired state. Used together, these create a smooth path from resistance to consent. Here's the unsettling truth. The ethics of these moves are not in the technique itself, but in the intention. They can help a patient let go of trauma, or they can coerce a person into choices that serve someone else at their expense. The human brain does not label influence as right or wrong. It only responds to coherency. That means the burden of use sits squarely with the practitioner. If you study these patterns, study restraint at the same time. Learn how to recognize when someone is being guided versus being steered. Build consent into your approach. You can test the mechanics without harming anyone. Try pacing and leading with harmless choices. Match the tempo of a friend's speech, then slow slightly and observe how their breathing calms. Practice embedding neutral suggestions in long sentences to feel how the mind catches them without flagging. Notice how your own responses shift when you experience a pattern interrupt. These low-risk experiments teach sensitivity, which is the foundation of ethical influence. Technically, advanced NLP relies on cognitive shortcuts the brain already uses. Presuppositions exploit assumed facts. Metaphors bypass literal scrutiny and seed imagery that the listener later interprets as memory. Temporal language frames the imminence of choices, making future actions feel present and inevitable. Anchoring ties an internal state, like confidence or curiosity, to a stimulus so the state can be recalled later. Those mechanisms combine to alter decision architecture without heavy persuasion. But mastery is not about mechanics alone. It's about calibration. The best practitioners read feedback constantly. They watch micro-expressions, listen for shifts in breathing, and feel when rapport tightens or frays. Influence is a loop. Each move produces a response. Ethical power comes from staying responsive to that loop and stopping when the other person signals doubt. If you feel triumph at someone else's confusion, you have failed morally even if the technique worked. Trust is the currency that makes long-term influence possible. Burn it for short wins, and you will be powerless later. There is also an important legal and social angle. Consent matters. In workplaces, in healthcare, in personal relationships, using these patterns without transparency can have real consequences. Reputation, mental health, and legal liability are not theoretical risks. They are practical consequences of manipulative application. So if you plan to teach or use advanced patterns publicly, pair each lesson with clear ethical boundaries and consent practices. Finally, the real skill is turning influence into empowerment. Teach people to recognize these loops in themselves so they can spot when others are applying them. That flips the dynamic from being prey to being sovereign. When influence education emphasizes self-awareness, the techniques become tools for mutual growth instead of asymmetric control. That is how influence matures into leadership. So learn the architecture, but learn restraint first. Practice the patterns in neutral, consensual contexts. Watch for the microsigns that indicate someone's autonomy is being tested rather than honored. Because once you can shape choices with language, the highest use of that power is to help people find choices they would have made with clearer information and fuller agency. Anything less becomes manipulation, and manipulation corrodes both the influencer and the influenced. If you want examples and a careful breakdown of a few advanced sequences used ethically in coaching or therapy, I can write step-by-step demonstrations that include consent checks and debriefs. Seductive dominance and the art of controlled mystery. Mystery isn't about hiding. It's about revealing just enough truth to make people lean closer. Real presence doesn't come from dominance or control. It comes from containment, from the ability to hold your own energy instead of giving it away too easily. The most magnetic people in any room are never the loudest or the most available. They're the ones who radiate calm self-possession, the sense that something is happening inside them that you want to understand but can't quite name. Attraction, in every sense, social, professional, personal, is born from tension. Not the kind that manipulates, but the kind that invites curiosity. The human brain craves closure. When it meets someone who doesn't overshare, doesn't rush to fill silence, doesn't collapse under a tension, it feels that tension and starts seeking resolution. That's the psychological engine behind intrigue. The mistake most people make is thinking presence is about performance. They try to project confidence instead of embodying it. But performance leaks energy. Real presence doesn't perform. It holds. It's the difference between chasing validation and offering gravity. Gravity doesn't move toward things, things move toward it. Mystery isn't a game of withholding facts. It's a discipline of self-possession. You choose what to reveal based on alignment, not fear. You don't hide to manipulate. You stay selective to protect significance. The more intentional your communication becomes, the more weight your words carry. When you speak less, every syllable lands deeper. Here's the psychology behind it. The mind assigns value to what feels scarce and attention to what feels unpredictable. When your emotional state stays grounded and your expression remains measured, you create emotional scarcity. People start watching for cues, listening harder, leaning in. You're not creating confusion, you're creating depth. Controlled mystery also plays on an ancient social mechanism: pattern completion. When we meet someone new, the brain tries to build a complete picture from limited information. If you give away everything, the pattern locks too quickly. Curiosity dies. But when you reveal in layers, the brain keeps working, keeps engaging, keeps wanting to solve you. That ongoing attention is influence in its purest form. Now, here's where it turns subtle. The power of mystery doesn't come from detachment, it comes from presence. If you're distant or cold, you break connection. If you're fully transparent, you lose magnetism. The sweet spot is emotional contrast. Warm energy paired with selective revelation. It's openness without exposure. You let people feel you, but not map you completely. That's what creates that almost hypnotic pull. The person in front of you can sense authenticity, yet they can't predict you. Their nervous system stays alert, tuned, awake. You've engaged the two primal circuits of attention, safety and novelty, at the same time. Safety through calmness, novelty through unpredictability. That dual signal keeps people fascinated. Energy management is the hidden core of this art. When your energy spikes outward, people feel pushed. When it collapses inward, they feel ignored. But when it circulates, steady, grounded, contained, it feels like presence. You're not trying to take or give too much, you're simply being. And that beingness has a magnetic frequency because it signals self-trust. Silence is a major part of it. Most people speak to manage anxiety. The truly magnetic person uses silence like punctuation. Pauses allow the other person's imagination to work. They fill the gap with their own projections. Those projections are often far more flattering than anything you could have said. When you master silence, you stop chasing connection and start commanding it. But this kind of power can't be faked for long. If you use it to manipulate, people feel the emptiness underneath. True mystery isn't about acting unreadable. It's about being at peace with not being fully understood. It's confidence without demand. When people sense that ease, they interpret it as depth. Authentic mystery also relies on boundaries. You know what's yours. Your focus, your emotional space, your purpose, and you don't surrender it for attention. Boundaries are what keep energy from leaking. They say, "This is where I end and you begin." Ironically, boundaries don't repel people, they attract them. because clarity feels safe. To practice this, start with self-observation. Notice when you speak out of anxiety, when you rush to explain or prove something. Instead, pause. Feel the tension in the silence. Let it breathe. The more comfortable you become with your own pauses, the more others will be drawn into them. Presence expands in stillness. Another practice is storytelling through implication. Share experiences, but leave space for interpretation. Instead of finishing every thought, end on an image or a question. The listener's mind will keep spinning long after the conversation ends. You've planted curiosity that grows in absence. The ethical key is intention. Mystery should never be used to confuse or manipulate. Its purpose is to maintain self-respect and create space for mutual discovery. You're not trying to dominate attention. You're inviting engagement through self-control. When done with integrity, this kind of magnetism builds trust because it feels earned, not engineered. Here's the paradox. The less you chase influence, the more influence you carry. When you don't need validation, people offer it freely. When you don't flood space with words, your silence becomes valuable. When you don't reveal everything, what you do reveal becomes unforgettable. Controlled mystery is simply emotional discipline, the art of letting curiosity work in your favor instead of feeding insecurity. Its presence refined into power. And the moment you master that balance, warmth with restraint, openness with self-possession, you stop trying to pull attention. Attention starts orbiting you. The hidden science of persuasion and control. You ever get the feeling that some people seem to pull decisions out of thin air, like they know a secret code everyone else missed? That feeling is real. There is a hidden science behind persuasion and control, and it is less about flashy tricks and more about predictable human wiring. Once you see the gears, the mystery peels away, and you realize influence is an architecture you can study, use, and protect yourself from. Here is the shock most people resist. Persuasion is not primarily about truth. It is about pattern, timing, and emotional economy. The brain is lazy by design. It prefers shortcuts, simple narratives, and predictable rhythms. Persuasion exploits those preferences. It offers easier mental pathways, less friction, less cognitive work, faster closure. When you make a choice feel simpler than indecision, people take it almost reflexively. That is the science you never noticed because it lives beneath awareness. Start with attention. Attention is the currency of persuasion. You cannot influence what you do not first capture. But attention is not captured by facts alone. It is captured by contrast, surprise, and emotional relevance. That is why a single vivid story can outweigh 100 statistics. The brain processes narrative as experience. When you tell a story that maps onto someone's fears or desires, their body responds as if it were real. Their physiology leads, their logic follows. That is the first lever of the hidden science. Next is framing. Framing is the simple act of defining the context before the content lands. Two people can describe the same event and produce opposite reactions simply by setting different frames. One frame makes something urgent and scarce. Another frame makes it safe and optional. The facts do not change, but the mental shorthand people use to interpret them does. Framing is the switch that turns neutral information into action or inertia. Then there is pattern sequence. The brain loves to be guided through a path of small agreements. That is the yes ladder you have heard about. Begin with tiny truths the listener will accept. Build momentum. Each small yes reduces resistance and rehabs the internal narrative to align with your outcome. The momentum effect converts isolated agreements into a coherent yes that feels like a decision they authored. That sequence is predictable and therefore repeatable. That is the craft of procedural persuasion. Memory manipulation is another hidden gear. People do not remember information neutrally. Memory is reconstructive. The last detail, the emotional peak, and the ending of an experience shape the remembered whole. Skilled persuaders engineer peaks and endings. They amplify a critical emotional moment and close on a note that favors the intended interpretation. Later, when the person recalls the event, they recall the engineered emotion more than the full set of facts. That selective memory is how stories become beliefs. Language matters, but not in the way most people assume. The structure of language can carry commands beneath the surface. Presuppositions, embedded suggestions, and metaphor bypass literal scrutiny and plant images directly into imagination. When a guide paints sensory scenes and links them to outcomes, the listener feels the outcome before they rationalize it. That is linguistic engineering, and it is immensely powerful because it works around resistance rather than through it. Physiology is a silent partner in persuasion. Breath, posture, tone, and pacing regulate emotion. When you control your state, you transmit stability. When you match someone's state and lead it, their nervous system follows. Mirror neurons do the rest. This is not mystical. It is biological resonance. Influence is often a rhythm rather than an argument. Change the rhythm, and you change the person. All of this is efficient because it honors one more truth. People rarely choose what they should. They choose what feels coherent. The mind hates contradiction. Once you get someone to act in a way that feels consistent, they will rationalize choices to preserve that coherence. That is why small actions matter. They anchor identity. The hidden science uses that inertia, not brute force. Now the ethical line. Knowing these mechanisms gives you enormous power, and therefore enormous responsibility. Used to help people align with their real goals, these tools accelerate growth. Used to manipulate others for selfish ends, they erode trust, damage relationships, and destroy reputations. Influence that relies on deception is always temporary. The social and psychological cost compounds until the past catches up. That is the second shock. There are always consequences. Mastery without restraint becomes the fastest route to self-sabotage. So how do you apply this responsibly? First, use clarity as your North Star. Frame options transparently. Allow people genuine consent and the space to refuse. Second, use sequence to educate rather than to trap. Build momentum toward outcomes that genuinely serve the person you influence. Third, monitor feedback constantly. If microsignals show discomfort, stop. Influence is a loop. Ethical use requires sensitivity to the loop. Finally, awareness is protection. When you can identify framing, pacing, and memory engineering in a conversation, you become immune to covert nudges. Teach yourself to pause, to ask clarifying questions, and to reflect before you commit. The mind that learns how it gets steered regains control by default. That is the quiet power of knowledge. The hidden science of persuasion and control is not sorcery. It is human psychology made visible. It explains why ideas spread, why movements gain traction, why brands stick, and why people follow leaders. It also explains how influence can be weaponized. Study it to influence better. Study it to resist being influenced. Either way, you will leave more choices intact and more power aligned with purpose. Because understanding how people decide is not about domination. It is about stewardship. When you use this science to make decisions clearer, to remove friction, and to help people act in their own interest. You turn influence into a tool for freedom instead of a trap for consent. That is the final and most important discovery. Cognitive biases. The human brain isn't built for truth. It's built for survival. And that means it cheats. It bends, filters, and reshapes reality to keep you comfortable, consistent, and safe. These shortcuts are called cognitive biases. Invisible patterns that decide what you notice, what you ignore, and what you believe long before logic gets a vote. Influence works because of these biases. When you understand how the mind naturally distorts information, you can align your message with those distortions instead of fighting them. You don't need to outsmart people. You just need to flow with the way their brains already work. Start with confirmation bias. The mind believes what it already wants to believe. Once someone forms an opinion, they start filtering evidence to protect it. They see only what proves them right. That's why debates rarely change minds. People aren't listening for truth. They're listening for reassurance. The influencer who understands this doesn't attack beliefs directly. They plant ideas that fit inside the listener's current reality. They say, "This isn't different from what you already believe. It's just the next step." The mind accepts new information only if it feels familiar enough to not threaten identity. Then, there's authority bias. People trust confidence more than accuracy. The brain uses authority as a shortcut for truth. If someone sounds certain, looks composed, and holds social proof, their message bypasses scrutiny. It's not intelligence that convinces. It's presence. That's why posture, tone, and certainty matter more than detail. The moment someone perceives you as the authority, their resistance drops automatically. Next is the halo effect, when one positive trait makes everything else seem better. If someone is attractive, well-dressed, or charismatic, the brain subconsciously assigns them intelligence, kindness, and credibility. Influence built on image uses this bias constantly. People don't evaluate objectively. They feel their way to judgment and then rationalize it later. The appearance of value creates perceived value. Anchoring bias is another subtle weapon. The first number, idea, or impression someone receives becomes the reference point for everything that follows. If you start high, every offer after that feels reasonable. If you start low, everything feels expensive. It's not manipulation, it's sequencing. The human mind can't judge value in isolation, it always compares. Whoever sets the first anchor controls the comparison. Now look at the scarcity bias, the psychological law that makes something more desirable when it feels rare. Scarcity triggers urgency, and urgency suppresses logic. That's why phrases like limited time or only a few spots left work so consistently. It's not because people need the thing. It's because they fear losing it. Scarcity reframes opportunity as survival, and survival always wins over reason. Then there's social proof, the safety bias of the crowd. When uncertain, people look to others for permission. They assume that if everyone's doing it, it must be right. Influence at scale depends on this. Every like, view, testimonial, and endorsement is a signal to the primal brain saying, "You're safe here." The influencer doesn't just speak to one person, they speak through the collective behavior of many. Let's talk about consistency bias. Once someone commits publicly, even to something small, they'll do almost anything to stay consistent with that identity. The mind hates contradiction. It's exhausting to believe one thing and do another. That's why the smallest yes can lead to the biggest compliance later. It's how the yes ladder works, one agreement at a time until momentum takes over. All these biases are defense mechanisms. They protect the ego from uncertainty and overload. But they also make humans predictable. Once you know which bias is running, you can predict the next reaction before it happens. That's why master influencers seem psychic. They're not guessing, they're reading patterns. The danger is when these biases are used unethically. When someone exploits cognitive blind spots to push false narratives or sell illusions, they're not influencing. They're hijacking reality. And once trust is broken, it's almost impossible to repair because people feel violated at a subconscious level. Their instincts realize they were tricked by their own mind, not just by someone else's words. The ethical use of bias is about guidance, not manipulation. You align with natural thinking patterns to help people see truth faster, not to distort it. You make decisions easier, not harder. You use framing, sequencing, and authority to amplify clarity, not confusion. Awareness is protection. Once you see these biases in yourself, they lose control. You'll notice when you're agreeing with someone just because they sound confident. You'll catch yourself buying into scarcity that isn't real. You'll feel the emotional pull of social proof and pause long enough to ask, do I actually want this? Or do I just not want to feel left behind? The deeper lesson is that the human mind doesn't perceive reality directly. It perceives through filters of emotion, habit, and expectation. Influence is the art of shaping those filters. But mastery means doing it consciously, with intention, empathy, and awareness. Every great persuader knows this. You don't control what people think, you control how they think. You give their mind a frame that feels true enough to enter, then let their own biases do the rest. Once someone's mind starts completing your message for you, that's real influence. So study the biases, not to manipulate, but to understand the architecture of human decision-making. Because when you understand how the mind cheats, you stop being fooled and start choosing consciously what kind of influence you want to create. Cognitive biases aren't flaws. They're shortcuts, built to help humans survive a world too complex to process fully. The question isn't whether you have them. It's whether you see them before someone else uses them against you. And once you see clearly, you don't just resist influence, you redefine it. Emotional contagion, an energy spreads faster than logic. You can argue with ideas, but you can't argue with emotion. The moment you walk into a room, your emotional state becomes a broadcast, and everyone around you starts tuning to it. That's emotional contagion, the invisible transfer of state from one nervous system to another. It's not magic. It's mirror neurons, the biological wiring that makes humans sync with each other unconsciously. You've felt it 1,000 times. One person's anxiety makes everyone tense. One person's calm settles the chaos instantly. One laugh in a quiet room starts a chain reaction. That's contagion. We think emotions are personal, but they're actually social. Signals meant to synchronize groups for survival. When one member detects threat or safety, the whole system responds. The influencer is the one who knows how to control that signal consciously. Most people let emotion happen to them. They're receivers. They absorb the strongest energy in the room without realizing it. But power starts the moment you become the transmitter instead. When your state is stable, focused, deliberate, others adapt to you instead of the other way around. Dominance, leadership, charisma, they all begin with emotional direction. Imagine you're about to enter a negotiation. If you walk in anxious, the other side feels it before you open your mouth. Their brain mirrors your uncertainty and interprets it as weakness. But if you walk in calm, grounded, and steady, their nervous system starts sensing with that. You just shifted the power dynamic without saying a single word. That's how emotional contagion creates silent control. Psychologically, emotions are contagious because they trigger shared physiology. Fear tightens breath. Calm deepens it. Excitement lifts tone and posture. When you change your body state intentionally, you're not just changing yourself. You're influencing everyone's nervous system around you. The stronger and more consistent your emotional signal, the faster others adapt to it. That's why truly centered people seem magnetic. Their energy acts like gravity. It pulls scattered emotions into alignment. But here's the catch. Contagion cuts both ways. If you can project emotion, you can also be infected by it. Spend enough time around fear, and your nervous system starts vibrating at that frequency. Spend time around certainty, and your body steadies. You become what you mirror. That's why awareness is everything. The untrained mind confuses empathy with absorption. True emotional intelligence isn't just feeling others. It's feeling them without losing yourself. To control contagion, you have to separate emotion from reaction. When you sense energy rising, anger, panic, tension, don't meet it head on. Pause. Slow your breathing. Drop your tone. Lower your shoulders. That physiological shift sends a counter signal safety. The other person's body will start matching yours automatically. Within seconds, you've regulated not only yourself, but them too. That's influence through nervous system leadership. In dark influence, emotional contagion gets weaponized. Manipulators know how to seed tension and feed off the chaos it creates. They raise emotional volume until everyone's reacting, then position themselves as the calm center. Once people associate relief with that person, control becomes effortless. It's emotional dependency disguised as leadership. The group starts seeking stability from the very source that disrupted it. That's the danger of emotional manipulation. It makes people addicted to the regulator instead of learning regulation themselves. Ethical influence does the opposite. It uses emotional contagion to elevate others, not to bind them. It helps people find balance in themselves, not rely on yours. True power isn't making others need your energy. It's helping them match it and sustain it without you. Think of the best leaders, teachers, or performers you've seen. They walk in with centered energy, and the room organizes around them, not through dominance, but resonance. Their emotions are clear, coherent, consistent. They don't leak frustration or insecurity. That consistency tells every nervous system nearby, it's safe to sink here. That's why people follow them instinctively. There's a science to this. The vagus nerve, the body's internal regulator, is constantly scanning the environment for cues of safety or threat. It reads faces, tones, breathing rhythms. When it detects calm, it relaxes. When it detects stress, it tenses. The stronger your calm signal, the faster others' vagus response aligns. That's how you can lower tension in a group without saying a word. But emotional contagion goes beyond calm and chaos. You can spread inspiration, excitement, focus, even mystery. The key is authenticity. The emotion has to be real, not performed. The body knows the difference. Forced enthusiasm feels like static. Genuine passion feels like voltage. Influence is never about acting. It's about broadcasting an emotion that you actually feel, amplified with precision. You can practice this. Before any high-stakes moment, a meeting, a conversation, a presentation. Decide what emotion you want to project. Confidence, peace, certainty, curiosity. Then feel it fully before you speak. Breathe it in until it colors your tone, your expression, your rhythm. That emotion becomes a frequency. When you enter the space, it spreads. People won't know why they feel different. They'll just feel it. And that's the real secret. The most powerful influencers don't control minds. They control states. Once you shift someone's emotional state, their thoughts, words, and choices align automatically. The brain doesn't decide first. It feels first. Change the feeling, and you've already changed the decision. At the highest level, emotional contagion becomes presence. You don't have to force it or plan it. You are it. Your internal coherence is so strong that other people's emotions stabilize just by being near you. That's when influence becomes effortless. You stop pushing, convincing, or performing. You just exist in a frequency that others crave. So if you want to master emotional contagion, stop trying to control others. Start mastering your own state. Because energy doesn't lie. The world doesn't believe what you say. It believes what you radiate. And when your energy is aligned, calm, and deliberate, you don't chase dominance. You become the center of gravity everyone else orbits around. The puppet strings effect. Power isn't about barking orders. It's about pulling strings so quietly that people start dancing to a rhythm they think is their own. The most dangerous influence isn't loud, it's invisible. It moves through social dynamics, hierarchies, and group emotions, not through commands, but through carefully placed cues. That's the puppet strings effect. The art of indirect control. You've seen it before. A single person walks into a room and says almost nothing, yet everyone adjusts their tone, their posture, their pace. Or someone drops a small comment, nothing special, and suddenly the entire group shifts direction like a school of fish. That's not coincidence. It's emotional geometry. The influencer doesn't push, they nudge the environment until it starts steering itself. Groups are living organisms. They move through shared emotion, not logic. Every group has hidden currents, social pressure, status flow, unspoken alliances. When you understand those currents, you don't need to swim harder. You let the current carry you where you want to go. The person who controls the group isn't the one shouting the loudest. It's the one whose presence defines what everyone else feels comfortable expressing. Here's the psychology behind it. Humans are tribal by nature. We evolved to follow subtle dominance cues: tone, confidence, emotional certainty. When the brain senses clarity in one person, it syncs automatically. It's an ancient survival instinct aligned with stability. The influencer becomes the emotional reference point, and once that happens, group behavior bends toward them without resistance. Think about a team meeting. One person walks in radiating calm certainty, while everyone else is unsure. Within minutes, the group's tone starts mirroring theirs. If that person laughs, others loosen up. If they frown, tension spreads. The group's state reflects their state. Even if they say nothing, that's emotional authority. And once you hold it, you can steer the entire group by adjusting your own signal. But the real mastery comes from indirect control. Instead of directing people, you direct what directs them. You influence influencers. You seed frames, values, and expectations that ripple outward through the group. It's social leverage. One subtle move that multiplies through others. The most powerful operators never deal with crowds directly. They move through nodes. People who already have access to hearts and ears. Here's how it works in practice. Let's say you want a group to support an idea. You don't pitch it to everyone. You start with the emotional anchor, the person whose approval shapes everyone else's behavior. You build rapport with them, align your language with theirs, and let them voice your idea in their own words. The group won't see manipulation. They'll see alignment, because people resist outside control but embrace internal consensus. Psychologically, this works through something called social proof amplification. When a high-status or high-trust member expresses belief, it doesn't just influence individuals. It shifts the group's emotional baseline. The rest conform to maintain cohesion. Humans fear isolation more than error. That's why it's easier to shift one respected voice than to convince 10 skeptical ones. You let the group influence itself while you quietly pull the initial string. But it's not just about status. The emotional tone of the group acts as a self-reinforcing loop. Once a shared emotion takes hold, excitement, outrage, curiosity, it spreads faster than logic can contain it. If you seed the right emotional frequency, the group does the rest for you. People start echoing, exaggerating, defending the mood, believing it's their own choice. That's when you know you've crossed into indirect control. Now, the dark side. Indirect influence can turn into mass manipulation when it feeds on fear or outrage. You can divide groups just as easily as unite them. Create a villain, a cause, a sense of belonging, and the group becomes self-policing. They'll defend the narrative even against truth. That's how propaganda works. The original manipulator doesn't need to maintain control because the group maintains it for them. The puppet strings tighten themselves. But ethical influence uses this mechanism differently. Instead of exploiting fear, it channels alignment through clarity and shared direction. It builds cohesion by raising emotional states, not draining them. The difference is intent. Control that suppresses autonomy breeds dependency. Influence that empowers creates harmony. Both use the same mechanics. The emotion that defines the group, but the outcomes couldn't be more different. Here's the paradox of the puppet strings effect. The stronger your desire to control, the weaker your influence becomes. True control doesn't come from domination. It comes from emotional primacy, being the calmest, most certain energy in the room. When you hold that, people organize around you willingly. You don't force them, you give them something steady to orbit. If you want to practice this, start observing how groups shift emotionally. Watch what happens when one person breaks a silence, changes tone, or laughs first. Notice how the rest adapt. The first person to define the emotional frame usually defines the group's behavior. Then, learn to be that person, not through pressure, but through awareness. Once you can read the rhythm of the group, you can sync to it, then slowly lead it where you want it to go. Indirect control is the quietest power. It's what generals use instead of orders, what leaders use instead of speeches, what manipulators use instead of confrontation. It's the art of emotional engineering, guiding a system from within rather than attacking it from outside. And once you master it, you realize the scariest truth about influence. You don't have to move people directly to move them completely. You just have to move the energy that moves them. That's the puppet strings effect. The most powerful hands are the ones you never see. The foot in the door and door in the face. Techniques. Influence doesn't always come from force. Most of the time, it slips through small openings. Moments where someone's defenses are down, just enough to let an idea slip through. Two of the oldest and most reliable persuasion tactics in psychology work exactly this way: the foot in the door and the door in the face. They sound like opposites, but they're really mirror images of the same principle, manipulating emotional contrast to steer agreement. The foot in the door technique starts with something tiny, a harmless request, so small it feels silly to say no. And that's the point. Because once someone says yes to something small, their brain starts rewriting their identity around it. They begin to think, I'm the kind of person who helps, or I'm already involved, might as well keep going. Psychologists call it the consistency principle. Once we act in a certain direction, we feel pressure to stay consistent with that identity. The original study that exposed this is legendary. Researchers asked homeowners to put a small sticker in their window supporting safe driving. Almost everyone agreed. 2 weeks later, they came back and asked the same people to install a massive, ugly billboard in their yard. Same message, same cause. The people who'd agreed to the small sticker were far more likely to say yes to the billboard. Not because they cared more about safety, but because they had already said yes once. Their brain needed to stay consistent. That's how the foot in the door works. You don't start big. You start small enough to bypass resistance. Once the first yes happens, momentum takes over. It's psychological inertia. Humans prefer to continue doing what they've already started, even when it escalates far beyond the original point. Every scam, every cult, every manipulative relationship uses this principle. It's never a big jump. It's a series of micro yeses that blur together until you forget where the line was. Now, the door in the face flips the script. Instead of starting small, you start with something outrageously big, something guaranteed to be refused. You ask for the impossible, get the no, and then immediately follow up with something smaller, more reasonable. The contrast between the two requests makes the second one feel like a relief, even if it's still a big ask. For example, if I ask you to donate $1,000 to a cause, you'll say no instantly. But if I then ask, all right, even $10 would help, your brain rebalances. You feel like you're compromising when really, I just anchored your perception. I made the smaller request feel acceptable by comparison. That's the power of contrast. The door in the face also plays on guilt and reciprocity. When someone refuses a big request, they feel a little bad, socially, emotionally. The next, smaller request feels like you're meeting them halfway. They feel pressure to reciprocate your flexibility with compliance. It's not logic, it's emotional balance. The mind hates being in debt, even symbolically. Here's the fascinating part. Both techniques use time and emotion differently. The foot in the door builds trust slowly through small agreements that accumulate. The door in the face shocks first, then retreats. One uses momentum, the other uses relief. But the outcome is the same: compliance without resistance. Now imagine combining them. You make a big request first, get the no, then make a smaller one they accept. That's your first foot in the door. Later, you escalate again, but now they're invested. They've already said yes once. Over time, those yeses multiply. The mind rationalizes every step until the person believes the progression was their idea all along. That's the real dark side of these techniques. They manipulate identity, not just behavior. Ethically used, these methods can help people grow, commit to habits, overcome fear, or take positive action they might otherwise resist. A good therapist might use the foot in the door by asking for tiny acts of courage that build confidence. A good leader might use the door in the face to negotiate effectively, setting high expectations before offering realistic terms. But in darker hands, these same methods trap people, escalating obedience, guilt, and emotional dependence. The key to understanding both is noticing the emotional rhythm. The foot in the door starts with comfort and expands gradually. The door in the face starts with tension and releases it. Both rely on emotional timing, not content. The words don't matter as much as the sequence. Think about how this plays out in daily life. A friend asks for a small favor. Just a quick call, a tiny task. You agree, of course. A week later, it's a bigger favor. You hesitate, but you don't want to seem inconsistent, so you do it. Before long, you've built a pattern where saying yes feels easier than breaking character. That's how compliance becomes habit. Or maybe you're negotiating. Someone asks for something absurd. A deadline you can't meet, a price that's too high. You refuse. They come back with something more reasonable, and you accept, not realizing that the second request was the real goal all along. You didn't win the negotiation. You just walked straight into the setup. The truth is, humans aren't logical creatures making rational decisions. We're emotional creatures seeking internal harmony. Once our brain sets a direction, through consistency, relief, or identity, logic rearranges itself to justify the path. Influence works by aligning with that bias. So next time you feel pressure to agree, stop and trace the sequence. Ask yourself, was this my decision from the start, or was it built step by step? Was that no supposed to make me say yes next? Awareness breaks the spell. Because once you see the rhythm of these techniques, you stop being the puppet. You start hearing the strings. And when you understand both the foot in the door and the door in the face, you hold one of the purest forms of psychological power, the ability to guide emotion through structure, not force.